The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class, by me. This is Chapter 1, titled There Is No, quote, free, end quote, market. Look at history and you'll find that the middle class was the creation of liberal democracies. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson did not fight a bloody war to create a country only for wealthy property holders. Our founders believed that every Bob Cratchit willing to work for his living should be able to earn enough to own his house and support himself and his family. That's what it means to be middle class, and part of why Jefferson put life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness into the Declaration of Independence. The founders also knew that a middle class doesn't just materialize out of thin air. That's why in the preamble to the Constitution, they wrote that one purpose of government was to, quote, promote the general welfare. 2 centuries later, when the middle class was in danger of disappearing during the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt almost single-handedly created a new middle class through his New Deal policies. Roosevelt's success demonstrates that government can and must promote the general welfare because only government can create the conditions that make a middle class possible. And FDR was able to do it only because of an overwhelming majority of Americans voted for it in a relatively free and open democracy. Listen to the right-wing pundits, the people I call the cons, and they will tell you something completely different. They suggest, and some actually believe, that a middle class will naturally spring into being when the kingdoms of corporate power are freed from government restriction. The way to create goods, according to the cons, is to free the market. When business gets to do whatever it wants, they say, it will create wealth, and that wealth will trickle down to the rest of us, thus creating a middle class. The cons' belief in free markets is a bit like the old Catholic Church's insistence that the earth is at the center of the solar system. The free market line is widely believed by those in power, and those who challenge this belief are labeled heretics. But it's wrong. Here's a headline for those cons who are masquerading as economists without having studied either economics or history. 1, there's no such thing as a free market. And 2, markets are the creations of governments. Governments provide markets with a stable currency for financial transactions. They provide a legal infrastructure and a court system to enforce the contracts that make the market possible. They provide an educated workforce through public education. And those workers showed up at their places of business after traveling on public roads, rails, and airways provided by the government. Businesses that use the free market are protected by police and fire departments provided by the government, and they send their communications from phone to email over lines that follow public rights-of-way maintained and protected by the government. And most important, the rules of the game of business are defined by the government. Any sports fan can tell you that without rules and referees, football, baseball, basketball, and hockey would be a mess. Similarly, business without rules doesn't work. In a corporate kingdom, a corptocracy, those rules are made by the businesses themselves, and they inevitably screw both the workers and the citizens. In a democracy, those rules are made by we the people, both through our elected representatives and through union negotiations with the business kings, lords, and CEOs. The cons believe that what business is business, and the government should keep its nose out of it, even when the business is run by Ebenezer Scrooge and leads to centuries of sick Tiny Tims and terrified Bob Cratchits. Talk show cons and TV talking head cons and political cons, both Republican, conservative, or middle of the road, euphemisms for corporate connected, Democrats, say that government just gets in the way of the market. They want to let the market decide our economy. Unspoken is their belief that if economic and social policy are made by the market, we don't need government, the voice and the will of the people for our domestic affairs. One of the most vocal cons, Grover Norquist, told National Public Radio's Mara Liasson in a May 25, 2001 interview, "I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub." During the golden age of the American middle class, people routinely voted themselves tax increases to invest in new schools, better roads, higher pay for police and firefighters, and a multitude of other infrastructure and public works projects. Hospitals were owned and run by local communities, as were water and sewage systems, and in most of the United States, power plants and other public utilities as well. Taxes, by and large, were thought of as investments in civil society and community, and were routinely embraced by the majority of the middle class. Of course, people made jokes about not liking taxes, but they still knew that without taxes, there'd be no services, and people wanted those services. Ronald Reagan and his public relations machine, funded by huge corporations and wealthy people like Joseph Coors, promoted the thought virus, the meme that taxes are bad and government is bad. Reagan ran as an outsider to government, although he was a former governor of California, and even ran for re-election as president against government. Reagan put forward the point of view of the wealthy elite who felt that they were paying large sums of their vast wealth to help the little people have good schools and communities that worked. He changed laws like the Fairness Doctrine in 1986 so that sycophants like Rush Limbaugh could appear in the public airwaves with heavy corporate funding to help convince the average person that taxes were bad and government was bad. Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act, which since 1881 had held at bay the aggregation of corporate power, and the media began forming huge monopolies that were then used to reinforce on national TV and radio the perspectives of commentators like Limbaugh. The book is Screwed. The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class and What We Can Do About It by Thom Hartmann.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Boy, do we have a fact-filled, fun, wild ride show today. Evan Greer is going to be with us about the fight for net neutrality. Dr. Richard Wolff will be with us in our second hour and our third hour. Matt Stoller is going to drop by. We're going to be talking about some of these giant internet companies and what does it mean for democracy in America. But to begin, the president has no clothes. Now, remember when that, you know, it wasn't an Aesop's fable. I guess it's just a standard, Middle Ages fairy tale that came out of Europe, and the story was that the king wanted some really fancy clothes. And a couple of con men came to the king and said, "Oh, we'll make you just extraordinary clothes, but they're so special that only brilliant people, only true geniuses, really smart people can see them." Or maybe it was that stupid people can't see them, whatever it was, something like that. And so you could tell it's been 35 years since I read this story to my kids. So these guys, like, they're making these clothes out of nothing, right? They're just, they're pretending they've got a loom, and they're pretending they've got clothing, and and the king gets naked and he puts these clothes on that aren't clothes, right? And he marches down the street totally naked, thinking that he's dressed in this beautiful raiment, and all the people are afraid to contradict him because he's the king. And they say, "Oh, aren't his clothes beautiful?" And he's walking around very proud, totally naked, and everybody is going, "Oh, look at the beautiful colors on that robe, and the fancy pants, and oh, the beautiful big feather in the hat." Yeah. Sort of remind you of Orrin Hatch saying, "Mr. President, you've been perhaps the greatest president this country's ever had." Or Mike Pence saying, "It's such an honor to serve you, sir." I mean, it goes on, but basically here now, Michael Wolff has published this book saying Donald Trump has no clothes. And I mean, in pretty stark terms. So, and I'm going to fill this in a little bit and give you a little more detail here, but in the context of this, what do we do I mean, if it is true, if Michael Wolff's book is true, and Donald Trump literally within 10, 20, 30 minutes forgets what he just said and repeats the same story over and over and over again, if Donald Trump is literally functionally illiterate, does not read, does not even skim, and by the way, I have a theory about that. Donald Trump's vanity is legendary. Donald Trump is 71 years old. Have you ever seen Donald Trump wearing reading glasses? I may be wrong, and there probably are 70-year-olds out there who don't need glasses to read. I mean, you know, they may be genetic freaks, but I'm sure they're out there. But there is this thing called presbyopia, which is the Greek for old eyes. And it starts in your 40s. And even if you have completely normal vision, I never wore glasses until I was in my mid-40s. I started having to wear reading glasses. And then in my mid-50s, I had to start wearing glasses that also, you know, for distance sight, because my eyes were getting older. And as your eyes get older, the lens, which, you know, is attached to two little muscles behind the iris and behind the cornea, two little muscles that are probably more than two, that hold the lens in place, and they stretch the lens or compress the lens in order to amplify, magnify, or diminish your distance sight. And as you get older, that lens gets harder. It loses its elasticity, and those muscles get weaker, and so it gets harder and harder to make your eyes see things that before you could see with no problem. So some people get LASIK surgery, and I'm guessing Trump probably did. And but the problem with LASIK surgery is, you know, by the time you're 70, your eyes are still changing. I think it's entirely possible that Donald Trump doesn't read things because he's too vain to put on a damn pair of glasses. And you can tell this when he's reading his speeches off the teleprompters. And on prompters, the type is an inch tall. And he's still squinting. I think he doesn't read things because, you know, but in any case, there's that. There's the dementia. There's the fact that Donald Trump is not really running the White House. Donald Trump didn't pick Ryan Zinke to run the Interior Department and to sell off the public lands of America to the Koch network and their buddies. That was Mike Pence, the Koch toady, the guy who owes his career to the Koch network and other billionaires. It wasn't Donald Trump who chose Scott Pruitt to run the Environmental Protection Agency to take it apart. Scott Pruitt, the total toady of the Koch network, the guy who not only denies climate change, but also thinks that it's fine if you know, big chemical companies and fossil fuel companies and oil companies and whatnot, or chemical companies, if they pollute our water, if they pollute our air, hey, it's no problem as long as it doesn't hurt profits. Donald Trump didn't choose him to run the EPA, Scott Pruitt. It was Mike Pence. In fact, Mike Pence chose pretty much everybody. This is not the Trump administration. This is the Pence administration. So, you know, we have to consider that when we're considering what's going to happen. On the other hand, you know, yes, Pence is toxic. Pence is a toady to the billionaire class. Pence is the classic example of what you get with Citizens United. You get a you know, fully bought and paid for politician. He's the classic example of that. But then you get to this kind of question, as it were, which is worse? Do you want an incompetent, demented madman in the White House who might start World War III, but, you know, has limited ability to do damage? That's the theory anyway. I don't believe that that's the actuality, because I think he's doing the damage. Mike Pence is very quietly in the background. He's set the whole thing. You know, he was in charge of the transition team. He was in charge of setting up the White House. He was in charge of filling the cabinet. This is Mike Pence's White House. So do we just turn it over to Pence? And if so, how? Tom Steyer's out there calling for impeachment. Needtoimpeach.com is his website. It's getting a whole lot of people. That's one option, but I'll tell you what's, you know, in Congress, the news stories are that one of the psychiatrists who has written several op-eds saying that Donald Trump is not just broken, but dangerous, testified to a bunch of senators this week on Capitol Hill. It's like several hours of closed-door testimony before a group of, there's 13, 14, 15 senators. One Republican, a bunch of Democrats. I believe that what Congress is looking at right now, and frankly, I suspect that several people in President Trump, in Donald Trump's cabinet, particularly including Gary Cohn, the former Goldman Sachs guy, and Steve Mnuchin, the former Goldman Sachs guy, although maybe not. Mnuchin doesn't strike me as all that bright. Certainly McMaster. And where's John Kelly been lately, by the way? Maybe seriously considering the 25th Amendment, where the cabinet and Congress can remove a president because he has become incompetent, incapable of doing his job. Michael Wolff's book, if nothing else, makes a powerful case that Donald Trump is incompetent. I'll go through some of the most explosive claims in his book in just a moment, but and then we'll pick up your calls on, what do you think about all this? There's also, of course, a lot of other things going on in the world. We've got, giant storms.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
South and North Korea. I mean, there's just no end to it. But this Michael Wolff book is shocking, if nothing else. And welcome back. Bob, watching Free Speech TV in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
To you, happiness being a relative word. But, I want to say, right in tune with what you're talking about, the hypocrisy of the entire system, all these people, all the names you're throwing out there, maybe people getting together and suggesting impeachment, but the whole system, it's not just Trump, it's not just Pence, it's not, the whole system, as you say over and over again, it's just so full of hypocrisy. There's no turning it over this way or that way. The whole system needs to be turned over.
Well, yes and no, Bob. There's one particular cancer that has attacked our body politic, and that cancer is money in politics.
Right,
and,
I agree with you.
And we tried to get that out of politics in 1973 after the Nixon scandals. We passed some really strong laws. You can't give more than $1,700 to any presidential candidate. Can't give more than $4,000 to a political party, all that stuff. And the Supreme Court blew it up in '76 in the Buckley case.
Yeah, we're aware of that. We're aware of that. And what I'm saying is the situation has gotten to a point where, you suggest The Emperor Wears No Clothes. I suggest a book entitled The Emperor Wears No Clothes by Jack Herrera.
Right.
H-E-R-E-R. It's a good book. It explains a lot about the Petropoly power and hence the nuclear situation of the invisible chessboard that can't be verified. What happened to the idea, the man who passed away recently, we've had so many good people pass recently, it's just astounding. Trust, no, verify.
Right.
You want to trust, but you got to verify on these important matters.
That was Reagan's famous comment about the Soviet Union.
Allowed to have,
That was Reagan's famous comment about Gorbachev. He said, "Trust but verify."
Well, yeah, I was thinking of the man who passed away here last year, or the year before.
There was a bunch of them. I don't know.
Russian diplomat. Anyway, he was American, but he was from Russia.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, the situation needs to be remedied somehow from the bottom up, and that the politicians will respond to. As you say, the politician gets behind the parade, or maybe he wants to jump out ahead of it after it's going.
Right.
But maybe that's the thing of the past. Maybe the way to deal with the money issue is to go ahead of the politicians, go around the politicians. And what we'd like to see in the media is more reporting on what people are doing with or without the blessings of their entrenched.
Well, what Move to Amend is trying to do is to go around the federal politicians by going to the individual states. And if you can get 34 states to pass a resolution saying that the Constitution should be amended to say that corporations are not people, money is not speech, and then you get 38 states to ratify that, it becomes an amendment to the Constitution. And you know,
we support that.
That's something we've got to be doing, and that's what MoveToAmend.org is all about.
We got to do more than that, though.
No, I agree, Bob, but that's the beginning. See, once you get the money out of politics, then you don't have the forces working against you to try to stop you. We'll be right back. Here with you. The other thing that you are not going to hear so much about in the corporate media is how we got to here. How is it that we have this man as our president? And it turns out, if you do a deep dive into this, if you look at the reporting, the research and the reporting that's been done on Robert and Rebecca Mercer's company, Cambridge Analytica, and the incredibly good work that they did on behalf of the Trump campaign, slicing, dicing, and parsing information. And, you know, we'll find out, you know, to what extent that they were using that information for micro-targeting individual consumers at the level typically of Facebook, among other things. But I think to some extent this is going to come out in the Mueller investigations. And, you know, whether and who it was, you know, who was buying these Facebook ads, and whether the Russian troll farms were being paid for by the Russian government or by Paul Manafort and all that other stuff. I mean, these are things, you know, inquiring minds want to know. But the bottom line is, and it's not just, by the way, Trump. It's like, how did we get George W. Bush and pretty much everything else? How did we get Ronald Reagan? And I would say it all goes back to 1976 in the U.S. Supreme Court. In 73, after Nixon resigned, Congress passed a whole series of laws to get money out of politics. I mean, really good legislation. You can't give over a certain amount. I think it was $1,600 to an individual politician. You can't give over a certain amount. I think it was $4,000 or $5,000 to a political party. There were all these very specific limits on money in politics. And a bunch of billionaires said, no, we want to be able to own politicians. And they took it to the Supreme Court. The case was Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976. And the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, said, and Lewis Powell wrote the decision, said, actually, it might not have been 5-4. I'd have to go back and look at that. But the Supreme Court said, sure enough, giving money to politicians or giving money to influence elections is considered constitutionally protected First Amendment free speech. That money is speech, right? I've never seen a dollar bill talk, but apparently in the world of Lewis Powell and William Rehnquist, it does. And had it not been for that Supreme Court decision, Robert and Rebecca Mercer would not have been able to go, you know, the billionaires would not have been able to go all in on Trump. And he would have faded early on. All the other Republican candidates wouldn't have had their own individual special interest billionaires. You wouldn't have had the Democratic Party being corrupted by billionaires in the banking and pharmaceutical industries. You wouldn't have had the Republican Party being corrupted by billionaires in the fossil fuel and chemical and defense industries. None of this would have happened, or it wouldn't have happened with such severity if the Supreme Court had not discovered in the Constitution that the founders wanted rich people to be able to control our political system. We have just a couple thousand people in the United States who fund more than half of all the political campaigns in this country. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. That's called oligarchy, as Jimmy Carter pointed out in this program. And then once the oligarch gets their, the oligarchy gets their oligarch, in this case Donald Trump, they're going to do everything they can to defend him and keep him in place unless he's no longer useful to the oligarchy. You know, throughout last year, I kept saying the Republicans are going to throw Donald Trump under the bus as soon as they get their tax breaks. Because the oligarchs who own the Republican Party are interested in only one thing: money. Whether it's the money that they're going to make by having Ryan Zinke destroy Bears Ears so that they can mine uranium there, or whether it's the money that they're going to make by having Donald Trump and Congress say it's fine to drill in Anwar and destroy the environment up there, or whether it's the money that Georgia Pacific will make if their pollution standards are loosened, or if it's the money that coal-fired power plants will make, you know, if those standards are loosened, if it's the coal miners this year the last year in 2016, the highest number of deaths in coal miners in years. We're dialing back safety requirements in our mines. Now, it doesn't mean that we're hiring more miners. It doesn't mean that miners are being paid more. But Donald Trump did away with those job-killing regulations, right? And put a mine owner in charge of the mining safety place. Or a mining industry shill. So it shouldn't surprise us when the people who are putting our politicians in office, essentially, by buying the elections, don't give a damn about governance. They don't care about whether Social Security works. They don't care about Medicare or Medicaid working. They don't care about international relations as long as they can make their money. It's all about the money. So the question was, you know, if Trump could bring along the base to harass Congress to say, yes, do those tax cuts, if Trump could do that, then they would leave him in power. But now that he's done that, and he's starting to say and do things that might make it less profitable for the oligarchs. In fact, you know, largely what has happened is, you know, Toto has pulled back the curtain, right? We're seeing the great and powerful Oz as, you know, this kind of short, elderly guy who's just, you know, I am the great and powerful Oz. No, you're not. Now we're seeing that Donald Trump is unwilling to let the White House staff touch his toothbrush because he's afraid they're going to poison him. He's unhappy about eating food in the White House because he's afraid somebody's going to poison him. That's why he eats McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken. I mean, do you get this? There's something deeply, deeply wrong here. And I still haven't gone through the 11 explosive claims from the new book, but you probably heard them all in the media. But, you know, we will touch upon them. But what do we do about this? I think that frankly, I think impeachment is going to be very, very, very difficult. With the 25th Amendment, I think there's a real possibility there. What do you think?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Schenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life.
staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for? I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, "You have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call," I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners on the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The hole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shen. Hartmann podcasts at thomhartmann.com/podcast. They're commercial free, and you can listen anytime, any place you want. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Evan Greer on the line with us. Evan is the campaign director at Fight for the Future. Fightforthefuture.org is their website. They have a brand new campaign, votefornetneutrality.com. You can tweet Evan at Evan_Greer or at Fight for the FTR, abbreviation of future, presumably. Evan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
Thanks for joining us.
The bomb cyclone in the Northeast.
Oh, are you in the Northeast right now?
I am. You can see the results out here.
Oh my! Oh
Pretty
my!
serious already.
Yeah. Well, stay safe, Evan, please. So tell us about this campaign, Vote for Net Neutrality. I think most Americans figure the war is over, the battle is over, there's nothing that can be done. Pretty soon the internet companies are going to start slowing down the websites that they don't like, and we're all just going to be screwed. What's the situation really?
So the news of net neutrality's demise has been a bit exaggerated, but we are definitely fighting a serious uphill battle to prevent that from happening. So to catch people up, just at the end of last year, the Federal Communications Commission voted 3-2 to gut basic protections that prevent companies like Comcast, Verizon, and AT&T from slowing down our internet, charging us more to access certain websites, or engaging in outright censorship and blocking. Fortunately, Congress has the ability to overturn that decision using the Congressional Review Act. Now, if you're an activist on any issue or follow politics, you may recognize that the Congressional Review Act is often used for really bad things, like gutting environmental protections, or, for example, the ISPs used it to get rid of basic internet privacy rules just last year.
Right. It gives Congress the ability. It gives Congress the ability to overrule any federal agency that's in the executive branch that does rulemaking in a context originally authorized by Congress, right?
That's exactly right. And so this is one case where a CRA is absolutely appropriate. The FCC went rogue. It's working for giant corporations instead of the American public, and they got rid of these basic protections that the overwhelming majority of voters from across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, independents, doesn't matter, support. So this is a moment where Congress needs to do its job, use the Congressional Review Act, and it can cleanly overturn the FCC's rulemaking and restore the strong net neutrality protections that millions of people support.
Right. So your website, for people who for whom this is an issue, which should be all of us, frankly, is votefornetneutrality.com. Do I have that right?
That's right, votefornetneutrality.com. And the idea here is that people can sign up to pledge to vote against any lawmaker that doesn't use this simple mechanism and cast their vote to overturn the FCC order by voting for the CRA. So this is one rare moment where in a tight election year, we have Congress taking a simple up or down vote on a clear issue where they can't hide from us. And I think that's really powerful, and we want to give people the power to take their anger about this issue to the poll.
Yeah, well said. Last question here, Evan. Republicans, the Republican Party famously has basically become the party that is for sale to the highest bidder, regardless of the topic. They'll even deny science for money. They did it for tobacco for years. They're doing it for the fossil fuel industry now. Clearly Ajit Pai and the two Republican commissioners on the FCC are looking at multi-million-dollar paydays down the road from these big ISPs for the gift that they gave them. Is that not true of most Republican lawmakers? Do you really believe that with a Republican-controlled House and Senate that we can peel off enough Republicans? Plus, it would require the assent of Paul Ryan to simply put it on the floor of the House and Mitch McConnell to make this happen?
So here's the story. I'm so glad you asked this question because it's really easy to start feeling like this is an insurmountable mountain that we're climbing. But this is why we can get it done. First of all, it's super important to understand that unlike so many of those other issues where lawmakers on both sides of the aisle do get bought off by special interests and corporate lobbying, this is one that hasn't become partisan outside of Washington, D.C. So Republican lawmakers, regardless of whether they care or not, know that their own voters, the people who support them and who donate to their campaigns, care about net neutrality and don't want it taken away. So that changes the dynamic from many other issues right there.
Right.
Then with the Congressional Review Act, we don't actually need leadership support to get something to the floor. In the Senate, you only need 30 senators to force a vote on the Senate floor. We've already got 29. I'm sure we'll get that 30th in the next couple of days or weeks. We'll get a vote on the Senate floor. Then we move to the House. In the House, we have definitely more of an uphill battle. We're going to need to get several Republicans to break ranks and vote with Democrats on this in order to get a CRA vote forced to the House floor. That said, we had 15 House Republicans break ranks to vote against that anti-privacy legislation that I mentioned earlier. So we have some headway there. We've already seen several Republicans coming out. And the reality is that we're winning on the substance of this issue. Killing net neutrality is going to be bad for small businesses. It's anti-free market. It's against all the things that Republicans say that they care about. And so this is one issue where I think it's going to be more difficult for them to hide from voters than on other issues. And we intend to make it an election issue in 2018.
That is great. The Congressional Review Act is something that probably most people who listen to right-wing radio are familiar with, because right-wingers are always trying to use it to overturn, progressive legislation. But I suspect a lot of
here's a chance to give them a taste of their own medicine.
There you go. I'm guessing a lot of progressives don't. This is perhaps the first time they've ever heard of it. But there is a law that gives Congress the power to overturn whatever the FCC does, and any other federal agency for that matter. And it can be very easily done. It just requires a simple majority vote. And, we can make this thing happen. Evan Greer, the campaign director at fightforthefuture.org. The new website, votefornetneutrality.com. Evan, I wish you the very best in this work. Please keep us up to date, okay?
Thanks for having me on, Tom, and thanks for all you do. Thanks
so much, Evan. You're doing God's work here. It's good stuff. Thank you. Well, let's see here. Pick up your phone calls. Mary in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Mary, you wanted to talk about Donald Trump. What's on your mind?
Yes, I wanted to talk about Bannon and his book.
I'm sorry?
I wanted to talk about Steve Bannon and his book. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do. It was your voice is a little muffled. I'm sorry, but I hear you just fine, Mary.
Okay, I believe that the reason why that he kind of was in on writing this book was because Donald Trump owed a lot. He owed a lot to the Ku Klux Klan, the alt-right, and the Nazi Party. And they were looking for him to do a lot of things for them. And those things he hasn't brought forth, And I believe that is the reason why Steve Bannon really wrote that book. And Mercer took her money from Steve Bannon. And that money he needed in order to threaten the Republicans with the candidates that he was going to put forth.
Mm. Okay. It's a good theory. Let me slightly recalibrate. And in fact, yesterday I was ranting about this, and I think I fairly clearly implied that this was Bannon's book. In fact, I thought at the time that Steve Bannon had written or was writing a book. But this book was written by Michael Wolff, who's written a number of books.
Yes, I know about him. That's the reason why he was in it, with those comments that he made.
Right. But Bannon's comments are in there. They're extensive, and apparently Michael Wolff has tapes of all this stuff. So you may well be right. Mary, thank you for the call and for the contribution of your thoughts to the program. Will in Cincinnati, Ohio. Hey, Will, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Hey, this is my scenario of how things are going to go down.
Okay.
Before Mueller's investigation is done, Trump's family, Pence, and the Republican Party come to Trump and ask him and tell him he needs to resign to save his family.
Yep.
The new president, Pence, pardons them all. It undercuts Mueller and it kneecaps the Democratic Party in the next cycle.
Yeah, I think that your scenario is entirely plausible. And
Trump could go out saying he has made America great, worked himself sick so hard this 1 year, but he succeeded in making America great already.
Right, and he's not going to resign the way Richard Nixon did, like, oh my God, I'm running away. He's going to resign like, okay, job is done. I'm going to turn all the rest of this, smaller stuff over to Mike Pence.
Then Pence just takes over the head of his administration. It's already there.
You're right, and Pence put all those people in place, so he's the appropriate person to run the White House from the point of view of all the people in the White House and the Republican Party. I would rather neither one of them.
Republicans, and it destroy and it hurt. And they win the next election. They keep the House and the Senate, and then they proceed to dismantle the New Deal.
Yep.
Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security.
Yep.
They then probably will get another Supreme Court appointment.
Yep.
at least by the time this 4 years.
Here's the one thing that could blow all that up, Will, and that is if the economy seriously crashes.
Yeah, but if they take the Social Security money and turn it into a 401k, they pump that into the stock market and it pumps it back up again.
Yeah,
preventing another crash for at least a while.
Yeah, for a short period. I don't think they could pull it off, but yeah, there are other levers they can pull. But Will, I think your analysis is pretty spot on. Thanks a lot for the call. Saeed in Gig Harbor, Washington. Hey, Saeed, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm a fan. I enjoy your program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm a psychiatrist, and I would like to say a few words. Okay,
you're a psychiatrist. Go for it, Saeed.
Yes, Tom, if you look at the Bible of Psychiatry, which is DSM-5.
All right, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association.
Edition 5.
Yes.
And a few years ago with DSM-4, I diagnosed Donald Trump with the two conditions, one in axis 1, which is bipolar, two in axis 2, which is antisocial personality disorder, and a little bit more severe form of it, which is called psychopathy.
Mm-hmm.
And he meets criteria for both of them. And I don't believe that Donald Trump needs to be impeached. A group of psychiatrists and psychologists need to get together in Washington.
Yeah, I agree with you, Saeed. The psychologists, they do.
You're
Hang on.
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Saeed, sorry to short you on the time there. We hit a hard break. I was not paying attention, but I'm with you. I think that they need to be consulting with the cabinet too. Thank you, Saeed. Back. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Like two things. First off, I believe that the Democrats will probably take over the House enough to start impeachment processes. But even if they take the Senate by a couple seats, which would be a pretty good achievement, don't you need 60 senators to prosecute an impeachment?
I think it might even take 66, as I recall.
Okay, which is even a taller order.
Yeah, which is why both Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton were not convicted by one vote in the case of Bill Clinton. I don't recall with Andrew Johnson how it worked out, but he was not impeached in the Senate.
I thought we'd get that close with this Senate.
Yeah. Yeah, I suspect you're right, Mark. And the other thing is that impeachment is a political thing. It's not a legal thing. And although it has all the trappings of legality and it has arguably legal consequences in that it's following the law, but it really is about politics. And Donald Trump and this era right now and the existence of Fox News and right-wing hate radio this is a very different world than it was in 1973 and 74. And I'm fully expecting that if Mueller comes back and says, Trump was colluding with the Russians, or Trump was, hiding money for people, Ivanka's jewelry company or Donald's real estate empire, whether it's diamonds or real estate, they're both frequently used for money laundering. If Mueller comes back and says either of those things, the Republican Party, they're already starting to rehearse this. You're hearing this in the fringes. You're hearing it on right-wing hate radio. You're hearing it at Fox so-called news right now that, oh, well, there's no law against colluding with the Russians. You might not like it, but it's not illegal. He can't be impeached for that. And, oh, there's no law against, well, there is a law against money laundering, and this is the essence of Paul Manafort's lawsuit right now. But Robert Mueller was not given the charge to look into money laundering by Donald Trump, back 5 years ago in Trump Tower. The charge he was given was to find out if he's collaborating with the Russians. And therefore, we can't, and this is Manafort's lawsuit. He's seeking to have all the charges against him thrown out because none of them have to do with Trump campaign or the Republican Party colluding with the Russians. They all have to do with illegal activity that Manafort engaged in prior to his involvement with the Trump campaign. And that's what they're going to say. And while that may not work in the case of Manafort in a court of law with a grand jury and a special prosecutor, I don't think Manafort's going to get away with it. I think that that strategy will work for Donald Trump and the Republican Party in an impeachment thing, contest. And I predict that Donald Trump would not get impeached, almost regardless of how severe the charges are against him, because Fox so-called news and right-wing hate radio and the billionaires will spin him out of this unless they decide just to cut him loose altogether. If they decide he's demented or dangerous, then all bets are off.
They got their taxes, so they might. But
exactly. But I think they'll use the 25th Amendment.
One more quick thing. If let's say that evidence is overwhelming that Trump's either incompetent or committed serious crimes.
Right.
Now, these Republicans have known at least about the incompetence for a long time. Is there no recourse for the American people against a party that is complicit in covering up this man's unsuitability to be president?
Oh, I'm with you, Mark. I mean, this is why I've been saying that for years. I've been saying that the Republican Party, in my opinion, is vulnerable to a RICO, Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations lawsuit. We'll see where it goes. Mark, thank you for the call. Welcome back. Marjorie in Gastonia, North Carolina. Hey, Marjorie, what's on your mind today? Marjorie? Is Marjorie potted up? Okay, Marjorie, I'm going to put you on hold. She's on line 4 if you want to check that out, Louise. Bill in Sunrise Beach, Missouri. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
The Trump thing of being illiterate, if you think of the movie Back to the Future with Trump being in high school, he's Biff.
Right.
He doesn't have to read, write, or do anything. He just tells McFly, make sure you have my homework so I have time to copy it in my handwriting.
Exactly.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And that's his character.
Well, apparently, according to this book, Donald Trump bragged about the fact that he never bought a textbook while he was in college.
I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it with his disorder or his character as a pure 100% bully.
Yeah.
He gets away with it. The other thing I wanted to make a quick comment about is I really hope North Korea and South Korea make some headway without Trump involved.
Oh, I think they're both committed to it. I think they're both very committed to it.
I think we become the obstacle with this administration in anything that the North and South Korea could come to terms with.
We are driving them together because we're scaring the bejesus out of both of them. And
that could be, but I wouldn't want to give Trump any of that credit. But he is a nutcase that.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a wise way to do diplomacy, but in fact, it may be exactly not the consequence that Trump wanted, because he appears to be very unhappy that North and South Korea might be talking. He wants to be the one to take credit for it. He doesn't want the new South Korean president to take credit for it.
South Korea was a little agitated with the THAAD missile stuff too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and a lot of South Koreans in particular. I mean, there were massive protests all across Korea because we placed those THAAD missiles. Excellent point. Ann in Los Angeles. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I wanted to talk about Article 25 or Amendment 25. Mm-hmm. I think that, of course, that's being considered because it's the fastest way. And I don't believe that this man would resign. Just because of his personality profile and his instability. I really don't believe that he would resign.
Well, here's the one thing that, if I may, Ann, and I'd love to get your reaction to this, that causes me to think that he would, and that is that he is, number one, fundamentally lazy. One of the biggest revelations for me out of this book was that he did not want to be president, that he had promised his wife he wasn't going to win, that when he did win, she burst into tears, that she sat in New York for 6 months and refused to come to D.C. And that his whole shtick was, I'm running for president to increase my brand value. My kids are going to become international superstars. My companies are going to be much more valuable. Don't worry, I'm not going to win. And then he won. So number one, he didn't really want the job. And I believe that, in fact, I've been saying that throughout the election. I was saying that through the Republican primaries. He was just doing it to increase his wealth. He didn't want the job, number one. Number two, he doesn't like the criticism. He's clearly in pain right now. And number three, if he can figure out a way, and number three, if they come to him, if his cabinet comes to him and says, if you don't do this, we're going to take you out, then, I mean, you know, bullies collapse pretty quickly when they're bullied back, or when they're threatened with something that they can't control. And I think it's entirely possible that he will figure out a way to not, quote, resign, but rather to say, I have done my job, I've made America great again, I am finished, I am out of here, and I'm going to turn this thing over to Mike Pence now that I've made everything work so wonderfully. And then go back to New York and run his empire. I'm serious, Ann.
Well,
I believe that that's how it's probably going to play out.
I was just laughing at the craziness of it.
But, you know, Fox will totally buy it. Right-wing hate radio will sell it. A third of America will you know, mourn his loss. I mean...
Well, here's what I kind of think, if I could go back to a timeline. Do you remember very close to the end of the campaign, he was saying, I don't know where the money will come from for my campaign. This is close to the end of his campaign. Right. And maybe I'll finance it myself. Well, I don't know. Who knows? On and on. And within weeks, his son-in-law was the head of his computer aspect of the campaign. Mm-hmm. All of that happening, and he was touted as a genius within just a few weeks. Now, he worked with Manafort with that, and also Roger Stone was involved. Yeah. I wish that there'd be a really deep dive on Roger Stone. He's a real wacko, and he has a 3x3 tattoo in the back of his neck of Nixon. And he's, you know, admired Nixon for decades, and he wants to be like him. But I feel that if you take it from the premise that Trump didn't perhaps believe that he was going to win, and maybe he really didn't win. Maybe that the computer antics that were performed and was the Russians and all of the hacking. I mean, they were hacking for months before, and perhaps something came about in the last 2 months, perhaps, of the campaign, and it was out there. And when he talks about it, he's very afraid that, you know, someone will state that he didn't win. He really didn't win, you know, and then he comes out in this paranoia and craziness that oh, I did win the popular vote. And I think that we should, you know, do away with the system, because if we have a president that only can win the popular vote, I think that would help our system.
Yeah, you're talking about doing away with the Electoral College. Okay. I think there's a broad consensus about that, and you know, this is that whole fair vote thing is you know, and you've got a bunch of states that have said, you know, once 271 electoral votes, states representing 271 electoral votes are all in, then we're all in, and it's a long slog to get there, unfortunately, and the Democratic Party should make this one of their top priorities. I don't think that they have, but they really should.
And I feel like the Democratic Party, if they were to step up, they have to step up now.
Bring up Ann. I can't hear Ann. Ann, okay, I'm sorry. What did you say?
Well, I think that the Democratic Party obviously needs to step up in unison and make a very, very strong push and continue to do that. I would like a few websites.
Yeah. Like I'm with you. Ann, we're out of time here now. Ann, thank you so much for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242.
Or visit tomsbeets.com. And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been. And they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics, This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number two, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, "There's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more." The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and Storm the Presidency. Is what would
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author, most recently, of Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. His website's democracyatwork.info and rdwolf with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, PROFWOLFF, or at democracy@WRK. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
Great having you with us. I assume you're no relation to Michael Wolff, the author who...
Yes, you're the fourth person who's asked me that today.
Yeah,
yes, I am no relation whatsoever.
Okay. So I'm curious your thoughts on the Fed minutes and Janet Yellen. There was some interesting articles over the last few days, mostly in the Financial Times, some in the business section of the New York Times, about the relationship between the Fed no longer, adding to their portfolio or even divesting themselves of some of the bonds and assets that they're holding, and what role the Fed has played in the recovery and since 2008, and what might happen if the Fed actually does raise interest rates more than just a few basis points here and there.
Well, I'd be glad to. A full disclosure, Janet Yellen and I were graduate students at the same time at Yale University getting our degrees. But other than that, there's no link between me and Janet Yellen any more than there is between me and Michael Wolff.
Okay.
Let me say about the Federal Reserve. They can sometimes be an independent source of economic policy. In a way, they were set up to do that. They're the closest thing to a central bank that we have here in the United States. We don't have a Bank of the U.S. We did many years ago, but that got itself into corruption and trouble, so we have a Federal Reserve, but it functions pretty much in the same way. And that basic functioning is to manage the monetary system of the United States, literally to try to shape the quantity of money in circulation, the terms on which you can borrow money, i.e. the interest rate, and so on. When capitalism crashed in 2008, You either had to have the government step in a massive way, which in a sense we could have done, but with a conservative like Bush as president at that time in 2007 and 8, as this crisis crashed down on us, you weren't going to see a massive government intervention because Republicans don't know or how or want to do that sort of thing. So it suddenly became clear to everybody that if we were going to do something about this crash, it would have to be the monetary authority, it would have to be the monetary system that carried the weight of doing that. And therefore, quickly, both before and since Yellen took over, you had a situation in which vast amounts of new money were created and pumped into the system, and the interest rates were brought down to virtually zero for years at a time. We've never had that before in American history. It's a wonderful testimony to how critical, how severe the crash of 2008 was, and how close we came, particularly in the last third of 2008 and the early months of 2009, to a literal meltdown of our economy. And so we've had now a decade. It will be looked at in the years ahead as a lost decade of American capitalism bumbling and mumbling along in the process of a system sustained by a level of monetary creation and expansion that we've never seen before, which is why it's now frightening people to think that they're going to unwind all of this, to raise interest rates, to pull money out of the system, which is what this proposal of what they're going to do in 2018 amounts to. Everybody's very nervous who pays attention that this could provoke a very serious problem. I find that to be the least troubling of what they do. I was also amused by recent reports in the press that they don't think the tax cuts of Mr. Trump and the Republicans are going to have anywhere near the stimulative effect that the government promises. And so they're in a way nervous even more because if it doesn't, as most economists think it won't, and also you raise interest rates and pull money out of the economy, which is what the Fed is scheduled to do, you may in fact overshoot the mark and produce another downturn. And finally, if you remember that capitalism has downturns on average every 4 to 7 years, this one is now 9 years old, or 8 years, depending on how you count, and that means by the law of averages, we should not be taking risky chances of a downturn since we're due for one anyway.
I have heard, I believe read in various places, that in the 1920s, the Fed, which was then a relatively new creation, correct me if I'm wrong on my timelines here.
That's right. The Fed was
1913, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. That in the 1920s, the Fed was pursuing essentially a loose money policy, and that that plus Warren Harding's cutting the top tax rate from, 90% down to 25% in the early 1920s. Those two things led to the bubble of the roaring 20s, and then when the crash of 29 happened, instead of the Fed reacting the way that they did in 2008 by pouring money into the system, they pulled back instead, or they didn't do much at all, and that deepened the crisis and all that kind of thing. Is that the case, or was the Fed pretty irrelevant in the crash of 29? I mean, are we seeing history repeat itself here in some variation or not?
No, I think there's a good bit of similarity. I mean, there are always differences. Each crash, each cycle of capitalism has its uniqueness, and you can always focus on that. But I think the common quality is that it's a very unstable system. It can go off the rails pretty quickly. It has done so regularly. The times vary a little bit. Sometimes it's a few months, sometimes it's a few years. But yes, I think there's a pattern, and the Federal Reserve has often been too little, too late. I mean, we like to say, the Fed did a good job in pumping up money after the crisis. But there were other ways to get out of the 2008 crisis that would have been much less provocative of the inequality that has gotten worse, There were alternatives back in the 1920s. Mr. Bernanke, who was the predecessor of Janet Yellen, is famous for having decided that because of the cutbacks, as you put it, of credit after the crisis hit in 1929, we quote-unquote weren't going to make that mistake again. Mm-hmm. But he had to be reminded, although I don't think he listens, to the fact that, you can't fight this year's war with the lessons from last year's war, and it may be very dangerous to practice a policy now based on what might have been or what was done 70 years ago. I think the fear now is that the real issue is we've never seen the buildup of this much extra new money concentrated in this a number of giant banks, fueling a stock market boom, but a boom nowhere else. This is a very new area, and it has not gone the way that they hoped in 2008 and 9. And therefore, it's a very dicey, open-ended question whether the end of quantitative easing or the end of pumping money in and the raising of interest rates could have unforeseen consequences the way literally everything else they've done has had unforeseen consequences. This is not a system that lends itself to very good management, and it's very dangerous.
It's not stable.
We will all live with the results of the guesses that they're making.
Dr. Richard Wolff. Hang on just a second here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Dr. Wolff's website is democracyatwork.info and rdwolf.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. Dr. Wolff, thank you.
My pleasure, and look forward to speaking with you again.
Me too. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's see here. Anita in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Anita, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just want to correct something really quick. First of all, yes, Andrew Johnson was not convicted by one vote, but as far as Bill Clinton goes, not one Democrat voted to convict Bill Clinton. The vote was 50 for conviction for obstruction of justice and 45 for perjury.
But they needed 51, right?
They needed 67.
67.
Yes.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Okay, thank you for recalibrating me on that.
You're welcome. Also, but real quick, I don't think that, first of all, I don't think Donald Trump would resign. I just don't think it's in him to do that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think his ego would allow him. And I also don't think that Mike Pence would have a chance in 2020. He doesn't have the kind of following that Donald Trump does, which is kind of a cult of personality.
Yeah.
I mean, Mike Pence could not stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody.
No, and this is the math right now that the Republican donor class has to be making. You know, if we lose Trump, we lose the foaming at the mouth base, but right. we have a competent toady to the billionaire class in Mike Pence. He has been his whole life. He was a toady to the tobacco industry. He's been the toady to the fossil fuel industry since the tobacco industry went down in the early 2000s. And you know, on the other hand, if we keep Trump in place, well, you know, we might keep the White House, and which means we get more Supreme Court justices and more federal judges and all that kind of stuff. Although they get that with Pence anyway. But like you say, Anita, Pence can't necessarily hold the White House. It's got to be a tough decision for them.
It does, but I think what might happen is if Democrats take over, and if they take over the Senate, they may not have the 67 votes, but the Republicans have gotten their tax cut. Yeah. That's basically why they continue to support him. So they may go ahead if the evidence is strong enough, and they really pretty much have no choice, because they may, if it's such a landslide, and I'm hearing maybe like a tsunami. I mean, This is what some people are saying.
Oh, they're talking about Arkansas flipping right now.
I know, it's crazy.
Or at least losing their supermajority. Yeah.
Well, Texas had a poll that had Mark Cuban beating Donald Trump here, and if Mark Cuban runs as a Democrat.
Right.
So yeah, it might be bad, and if that's the case, you might see Republicans, you know, stop supporting him so much or stop defending him the way they have.
Yeah. Although,
that's what I think.
You know, I mean, Republicans have to feel totally whipsawed, because on the one hand, they've got, you know, the Yahoo base that that doesn't really care about the facts or what's going on. They just, they watch Fox News all day long and they think Trump can do no wrong. And on the other hand, you've got the donor class that is just, completely, as long as they get their tax cuts, that's really all they want. And just, give me the tax cuts. And
right, but they don't. But they've created this. They've created this mess for themselves. I know. They've created this situation. So let's see. I don't know how they're going to get out of it. You know, this has been a long time coming.
Yeah, it has. And like I said, the seeds for this were planted in 1976 with the Buckley case. And we can thank the Supreme Court for this whole damn mess. And ironically, this has been what, both the Bush, winning but not winning because the Supreme Court intervened in 2000, and then Trump losing by 3 million votes. I mean, this is where we're at. It's just nuts. Anita, thank you for the call. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, gee, I had a right-winger who wanted to tell me how terrible I was. That was going to be our very first call, and he hung up. What a shame. Okay, Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing today, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Okay, love your show. But I got a question for you. Are we going to hold people like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan feet to the fire? Are we going to remind everyone that's supporting the Donald Trump right now, later on in the future, of how complicit they are with this regime? Because basically, they're allowing Donald Trump to do what he does, and part of their mechanism, of course, is to control us through the media. And when they complain always about progressive media or leftist media, we got to remember, they're run by corporations. And it's the corporate media that's taking advantage of the people and the people's trust.
I don't disagree. It's a good analysis, Charles. And as long as our news media, specifically, as long as our news media has no obligation to the truth or to news or to informing the populace in the way that the founders imagined when they established fourth-class postal rates or when they wrote the First Amendment, as long as that's the case, we are going to have a badly dysfunctional electorate, a poorly informed electorate, which, are going to make tragic choices, which is what we're seeing. Well said, Charles. Thank you. Corky in Hilton, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind today?
Oh, Tom, now that the stock market is all-time high,
right?
Where's our transaction tax so we can pay for our Medicare and we can pay for our kids' college?
Yeah, good question. And the stock market, by the way, has been at an all-time high for a couple of years now, I think. It's what we're seeing is an extension of the Obama recovery from the Bush crash. And, in fact, Trump has not yet started operating under a Trump budget. We're still operating under the last of the Obama budgets. So,
exactly.
How he can take...
We're entitled to a transaction tax. These guys on Wall Street have been raking it in for years.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting nothing out of it.
Yeah, I agree. Well said, Corky. Thanks. Bill in Sunrise Beach, Missouri. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Oh, hey, I got through twice today. That's great. The tax plan.
Twice today? Bill, you're only supposed to be able to call in once a week.
So am I on?
Yeah, you're still on because you're on. I didn't realize that, but yeah.
Okay, sorry, but the tax plan, you tried to get somebody to realize that if they take the $2,000 gain just for the 6 or 7 years, they're really doing a disservice. And I'm wondering how much that divides and conquers, how many people may end up staying along with the Republican base or whatever because they've got the $2,000 a year tax break.
Yeah, I don't know.
As
you know,
part
it's
of that,
and this is
to me, it's another divide and conquer aspect from the right.
Sure.
That's
all I've got.
There are going to be some Democrats that are going to go, wow, I got $1,400 extra this year.
Yeah. With that,
but
until they have to apply for unemployment or until they qualify for Social Security. I mean, the Republicans are proposing another big cut in the Social Security Administration's budget, so that it's going to take longer and longer and longer for you to even interact with the Social Security Administration. So that you'll get more and more frustrated with Social Security, so you'll be more and more vulnerable to calls from Wall Street billionaires like Pete Peterson to privatize it.
Well, you're going through a little bit having a harder time getting a Medicare doctor on the West Coast. I understand you said that's been, and that's part of it too. So there could be a way they get out of this, and that's what scares me more.
Yeah. Yeah.
That, they just, in 8 years or in 4 years, everybody goes, oh, that wasn't that bad of a job.
Yeah, they've already announced that they're going after Medicare and Social Security. I have a feeling that the American people, outside of the people who regularly watch Fox News, it's amazing to me how effective the propaganda over at Fox News is. I mean, it's just astonishing.
It is. I travel on the road. And when I'm on AM radio, it's disheartening.
Yeah, yeah. It's
what you can't. All you hear is them.
Yeah, and it's just blatant lies and xenophobic and racially hate-filled rants and everything else. It's amazing. Bill, thank you for the call.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope I didn't get anybody in trouble by sneaking in a second call, but thanks. I love listening to you.
That's okay. Thanks. All right. Thanks a lot, Bill. John in Huntington, New York. Hey, John, what's up? John? I'm not hearing John. Let's try Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, you make a great case for Trump preferring to resign over, going through any sort of impeachment process, and I believe you're right. I think the donor class would prefer a toady at this point. But the reason why I called is that this. I wanted to talk about this Michael Wolff book, and from what I'm hearing, it sounds a lot, or it's bringing back memories of Michael Hastings with General McChrystal. There's a lot of rumblings about, people that should have known better than to talk on the record.
Right.
And then also there's questions about judgment, like how did he even get into the West Wing in the first place? And I'm sitting here thinking, wait a minute, they're not addressing the problem. The problem is, like with General McChrystal, these guys get drunk on power. I mean, of course, Trump administration and all his people, it makes total sense to me that they would. I mean, for General McChrystal, it was very much out of character. Okay, I mean, he's infinitely smarter than Trump, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've met him and talked with him. In fact, in 2004, I talked with him, and he said, we can't kill our way out of this war, which shocked me. Anyway, back to you.
Well, no, I mean, he just made a bad decision, He was trying to impress those around him. And also, but the problem is, I heard General Kelly is banning cell phones. And see, I'm like, yes, that is textbook.
Right.
Instead of addressing the problem, they try to prevent the problem from being exposed.
Well, that's because the problem is that this administration is rotten to the core, and if this book is to be believed, along with lots and lots of other corroborating evidence, like Rex Tillerson calling him an effing moron and Gary Cohn calling him an idiot, Donald Trump apparently has an IQ of about 80, maybe 90. And I mean, this is, you're right, Stanley McChrystal was a very, very smart guy. Donald Trump is not. And I think that the proof of that, if you look at his business career, Trump Steaks, Trump Water, Trump Casinos, he can't even have a casino. Anyhow, we'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Medea Benjamin's new book, Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection. And this is from the introduction. Through the women-led peace organization Code Pink, which I co-founded with Jody Evans after the 9/11 attacks, I have spent much of the last decade standing up against the U.S. military intervention in the Middle East and supporting local democracy activists. I traveled many times to the region, listening to human rights activists, marching with them in the streets, dodging tear gas and bullets, and getting beaten up and deported by government thugs. I have seen firsthand the deadly effects of U.S. foreign policies. The 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq destroyed the lives of millions, including many of my dear friends, and unleashed the sectarian hatred that later gave birth to the Islamic State. I recall a conversation with my Iraqi colleague Yanar Mohammed, daughter of a Shiite father and a Sunni mother, and founder of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. When I asked her what was the most notable legacy of the U.S. invasion of her country, she gave the chilling response: we, Sunnis and Shia, learned to hate each other. In another part of the Middle East, U.S. military support for Israel has wreaked havoc on the lives of Palestinians and aroused the ire of people throughout the region. Continuous U.S. military interventions, from drone warfare in Yemen to overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi in Libya to funneling an endless stream of weapons into the region, have unleashed new levels of violence. But the United States is not the only nation whose massive footprint has been trampling on the lives of people in the Middle East. The other nation is Saudi Arabia, an oppressive monarchy that denies human rights to its own people and exports extremism around the world. It also happens to be the closest U.S. ally in the Arab world. During the 1980s and 1990s, I met intolerant and violent young men in Pakistan and Afghanistan who were trained to hate Westerners in Saudi schools. In 2001, I saw my own nation convulsed by an attack on September 11th that was perpetrated mostly by Saudis. Not hard to connect the dots behind the spread of the Saudi intolerant ideology of Wahhabism, the creation of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and the attacks in New York, Paris, Brussels, and San Bernardino. You can also connect the dots between Saudi Arabia and the failure of some of the historic uprisings associated with the Arab Spring, since the Saudi monarchy did not want calls for democracy to threaten its own grip on power. I was in Bahrain after Saudi tanks crushed the inspiring grassroots encampment in Pearl Square, where tens of thousands had gathered day after day to demand democracy. I will never forget the excitement of being in Tahrir Square during the Egyptian Revolution, and watching aghast as a military coup backed by the Saudis put some 40,000 activists behind bars. In Yemen, the Saudis took a direct military role in that nation's internal conflict with a ruthless bombing campaign. When I travel overseas, people often ask me why Saudi Arabia, a country that is so repressive internally and overseas, is such a close ally to the United States. Iranian friends want to know why the U.S. government is so outspoken about human rights violations in Iran, but silent about the worst abuses in the Saudi kingdom. Yemenis want to ask why my government supplies weapons to the very nation, Saudi Arabia, that bombed their schools and hospitals. Saudi women ask why the United States, which professes great democratic values, props up a regime that treats women as second-class citizens. The easy answer is oil, weapon sales, and other business interests. Oil has formed the basis for U.S.-Saudi ties. The kingdom has become the largest purchaser of American weapons in the world, and hundreds of billions of Saudi petrodollars help shore up the U.S. economy. But there's another reason, perhaps more critical than any of the others. The American people have not demanded an end to this dysfunctional, toxic relationship. Why? In part, because the American people know so little about it. Even Americans who consider them parts of a peace movement know virtually nothing about the kingdom. The Saudi press is muzzled, foreign journalists are strictly monitored, and only tourists visiting for religious purposes are allowed into the country. Add to that a Saudi lobby that lines the pockets of U.S. think tanks, such as the Middle East Institute, Ivy League universities, such as Harvard and Yale, and influential institutions from the Clinton Foundation to the Carter Center. This checkbook diplomacy helps put a happy face on the abusive monarchy and silences its critics. So we have a lot to uncover. This book is meant to be a primer, giving readers a basic understanding of how the kingdom holds on to power internally and tries to influence the outside world. It looks at the founding of the Saudi state, the treatment of dissidents, religious minorities, women, and migrant workers, the spread of Wahhabism, the kingdom's relationship with the West, and its role in the region, and what the future might hold. As we delve into the inner workings of this dystopian regime, don't mistake criticism of Saudi Arabia for Islamophobia. This book is not a critique of Islam, but a critique of three intertwining factors that have shaped the Saudi nation: the extremist interpretation of Sunni Islam known as Wahhabism, the appropriation of the Saudi state by one family, and Western support for this dynasty. Criticizing Saudi Arabia should not be equated with support for Saudi's nemesis, Iran. The Iranian government is guilty of some of the same abuses as the Saudis. Book Kingdom of the Unjust. Podcasts at thomhartmann.com/podcast. They're commercial free and you can listen anytime, any place you want. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Terry in Nashville, North Carolina. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Back at you.
Also, about the tax bill, the Republicans, like you had said before, I mean, they passed their tax bill. They're real happy. And I feel like what they've done, or whatever they do, it seems like the Republicans know that all they have to do is work on the two issues that their base really cares about, and that's abortion and gun rights. Mm-hmm. And like Donald Trump said, I mean, he could shoot somebody in the street. Well, the Republicans feel the same way. They can do whatever they want, including this horrible tax bill. And as long as they push that during the election, the abortion and the gun rights, then they feel like they've got it. And I really feel that that's something that we as Democrats have to really work on and explain to people, you know, what the Democrats are not trying to take away people's guns, and that abortion rights, I mean, it is a right, and that, no, we're not saying, you know, people should get an abortion, you know, up to the last day, or women should get an abortion up to the last day of the pregnancy. You know, that's not what we're saying. I mean, we believe in Roe versus Wade. And also, another thing I wanted to say is, and also, I really want people to, or Democrats, whenever they go out and they talk to people, to push the idea, because we know that Trump is going to start talking about infrastructure. Well, Obama tried to do that just about every year that he was in office, but Mitch McConnell wouldn't even let it come out for a vote. I mean, we needed infrastructure for years, and he tried. But now that, you know, Trump's talking about it, the Republicans, you know, think, okay, it's a pretty good idea. But we've got to remember, and we've got to remind people that Obama tried to do it too. But Mitch McConnell, the deep state president, he is the one that wouldn't even allow it to come up for a vote.
Yeah. And Paul Ryan's done that on a few issues too. Yeah.
Yes.
You know, excellent points all, Terry. And it highlights why there's all this conversation in Sturm and Drang right now around, you know, is Trump competent? Is he crazy? Should he be removed by the 25th Amendment? Should he be impeached, et cetera, et cetera? But none of this is talking about the larger issue, which is we wouldn't have Trump. We wouldn't have had, for that matter, we wouldn't have had, in my opinion, even Reagan or Bush if it wasn't for Buckley and Citizens United, if it wasn't for these decisions by the Supreme Court that allow the billionaire class and the big corporations to take, you know, to bring their politicians to the public and convince the public to vote for them. And this, you know, this money in politics issue, this is the cancer that we need to excise from our body politic. And it was a cancer that was inserted into our body politic by the Supreme Court without, in my opinion, the authority of the Constitution. And it needs to be extracted, and we need to get around the Supreme Court with a constitutional amendment saying very simply, corporations are not people and money is not speech. And we need to be doing that as soon as we can. Terry, well said. Thank you for the call. John in Boston. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First off, happy belated New Year to you and Louise and everyone.
Thank you. You too.
Well, we're in the middle of a blizzard. I got disconnected once. I hope I don't happen now, but I haven't spoken to you in a while. First off, Tom, I agree with the premise of most of what you've been saying. You know, how can I say? This is a culmination moment of, as you said, The Emperor Has No Clothes, this Michael Wolff book. However, if you remember back on election night, there was a still photo, and I was the only one that noted this. Maybe you did, I don't know. And everybody, we all were stunned, obviously, election night. However, in this still photo, He's surrounded by his family and the people closest to them. And yes, they were stunned in the photo. But you know how they say a picture's worth 1,000 words? I said to so many people, these people are scared.
Yeah.
And you could see it in their face. I mean, they know him best. They know how he reacts in situations. They know his intelligence, his personality, all of it. And they were scared. Yep. Because as Flynn and others have pointed out, he didn't want to be president. I think you have too many times, Tom. Yep. He didn't want to be president. He thought it was a money-making, he would make financial connections. And was it Flynn I heard that said, oh, the Russian ties won't matter unless he becomes president. But he won't become president.
Yeah, that's a quote out of Wolf's book. And I was pointing this out throughout the Republican primary, that at least half, and probably more than half of the people up on that stage were not there because they were seriously running for president. They were there because they were trying to jack their income. They were trying to increase their consulting fees. They were trying to sell books. They were trying to, the Republican Party is a party of hustlers. I mean, they're grifters and hustlers and shills operating on behalf of billionaires, and who get mind-boggling amounts of corporate welfare and monopoly-like power in industry after industry, and are devastating our body politic with the power and money that they get from those positions. And and the other point that Wolf made in the book was that from Trump's family knowing that he'd been doing money laundering to General what's his name knowing that he had committed crimes probably or at least done things that wouldn't look good. Let's say taking his speaking fee, for example, going to Moscow. Clearly, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, the other part of it, too, is I also thought it was a prelude to basically Trump TV and with Breitbart or Bannon, although that may be because that's what he knows. It's all about ratings. He did The Apprentice. But beyond that, one other thing very quickly, I know you have other callers. I agree with your previous call on what you said, that I think Trump won't resign. But if he's forced to resign, somehow he can claim, I made America great. And this is what I think. It was kind of curious a month ago. Sarah I always say whatever.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders?
Yes, I think of what other names that people say, and I don't want to be disrespectful. Had said, oh, by the way, the president's having a physical. And I found that curious. And I'm wondering if that's his way out trapdoor. Let's just say, not mental, which obviously there is, but what if, the president's worked so hard and he has to resign? Then, as your previous caller said, Pence can later pardon him and his family, and Fox News and right-wing media will say, this was a great president. He worked himself in his first year, and he can still pump up his brand. And sorry to say, because nothing's changed with voter fraud and gerrymandering and even Russia, affecting the election. And since there are 24 seats in the House, maybe the Democrats will get, unless there's an 80% voter turnout, I'm sorry to say they're going to get the cake and eat it too, and Trump can walk away with a pardon and get what he wants. I hope I'm wrong, Tom. I hope to God I'm wrong, but I don't know. And you look at Nixon got pardoned, the precedent was set, and I don't know. What do you think? I don't know.
I think that you may well be right, John, and that was something that I hadn't considered. I read that the press release this morning saying that he has a physical, quote, routine physical, the one that every president gets every year, scheduled for January 12th, I believe. And I'm assuming this is with, the White House doctor from Walter Reed, as opposed to the guy in Brooklyn who
he's the healthiest president in the history of the country.
Yeah, instead of the guy who's been writing his Rogaine scripts or something,
Exactly.
But they would have to come back with something that would be. Yeah, here's the thing that they would have to come up with something that doesn't embarrass him. So they couldn't come back and say, he's got you know, erectile dysfunction or mental dysfunction. Actually, that would be the thing that would, you know, his brain isn't working.
He wouldn't
as well.
go with that, though. He wouldn't go for that.
Yeah, but so what is it that? Yeah, I mean, my point is that he's done this before. He got out of the draft by claiming he got a medical deferment for having bone spurs. And so, what is the medical deferment going to be this time? Is, you know, because if he says, oh, you know, my blood pressure's too high, well, you can control that with medication. If he says my cholesterol's too high, well, why don't you take Lipitor and stop eating McDonald's? You know, I'm not sure what they could say that he could use as a justification to resign without losing face. Can you think of something?
Well, unless, I mean, look, he doesn't want to be president. We knew that. The book is admitting to it. Maybe, and again, it gets sympathy too, and maybe gets Mueller off his back. Oh, don't pick on. What if he says he has early dementia like his father? And it's just the early stages, and he loves this country so much, and he's worked so hard. You know, after Ronald Reagan, he doesn't, you know, want to be a burden to the country, and Mike Pence will do a great job. I mean, you can see it. It writes itself in some ways. And he looks like, you know, the sympathetic hero, and he's putting country first. And meanwhile, he's raking it in, him and his family and his brand. And oh, don't pick on him, don't prosecute him. The man is sick.
So then the question becomes, John, if that's, because that is something that's serious enough, I can see it working. The problem is Trump's pride. Would Trump's pride prevent him from confessing to dementia? But then the secondary question is, if he's looking at going to jail, or if he's looking at his son-in-law going to jail, or his son going to jail, will that be enough for him to swallow his pride and say, you know, I've got dementia, I'm stepping down, Mike Pence is going to pardon all of us, the entire Trump crime family gets off, they all go back to New York and go into business with John Gotti again or something, you know? Yeah. John, excellent points all. Thanks for the call. Keep safe in Boston.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Talk Media News in a few minutes, find out what's going on in the world. We'll continue with your calls, and Matt Stoller is going to be with us in the next hour. Why am I not hearing anything? Oh, we're on the air. Welcome back. Roy in Sunrise Beach, Missouri. Hey, Roy, what's on your mind today? Sorry about that, Roy.
I'm thinking that taxes should be able to be sent in on a postcard. All taxes below $75,000 should be eliminated, and raise the taxes on the wealthy above $75,000 covered.
You know, Roy, taxes don't matter.
I understand that, but I'm saying that they talk about how you can send in taxes on a postcard.
Right. Well, you know how they do it in Japan? The government calculates it for you in Japan, and at the end of the year, they send you a summary, which, well, in the Scandinavian countries, they actually break it out. They say, you paid $312 in taxes this year, or $3,200 in taxes. 2,000 of that went for education. 1,100 of it went for fixing roads. You know, obviously my math is crazy here, but they itemize your taxes, so you know where all your tax dollars went. I think number one, we should do that, and number two, we should also do it like Japan does, where the IRS actually does all the math for you, put out of business the whole H&R Block industry. And you know, there is no H&R Block in most countries because most people's taxes are very straightforward to do. The only people who have to actually have a CPA doing their taxes are people who have very complex tax returns, you know, which is a small percentage of the 1%. So yeah, but the other thing I would add though, Roy, and I keep going back to this, McDonald's in Denmark pays $45,000 a year starting pay for teenagers working at McDonald's. Now, why do they pay that? Because those people are paying a 40% income tax. Now, so they're ending up, you know, with $25,000 a year as their pay. So why would, and what do they get for that $20,000 in taxes that they're paying? First of all, their wages, their take-home wages in Denmark are the same as they are in the United States in terms of purchasing power. They're actually a little higher in Denmark, but, it's not that different. But all those extra taxes that working people are paying in Denmark pay so that everybody in the country has free health care. Everybody in the country can go to college, all the way up to a PhD or an MD, and they get a $200 a month stipend to help pay for books and rent. Everybody in the country has a social safety net. There are retirement facilities all over the country that are fully paid for by the government. You quit working at the age of 60, and if you want to go into a retirement facility or not, if you want to stay at home, they take care of you. I mean, they have a very, very, very healthy social safety net. And this is the thing that, the billionaire class has convinced American working people that having tax money taken out of their paycheck is costing them money. And that's a lie. Because what happens is that the market for labor for working people is an after-tax marketplace. And so if taxes go up on working people, wages will go up on working people. You can see that anywhere in the world. And when taxes go down on working people, wages go down on working people. It's real simple. So, given that, I think that, when progressives, when Democrats, when anybody on our side starts saying, we need to cut taxes on working people or whatever, they don't understand how the system works. And it just makes me crazy because we need tax revenue. We need to have a government because there are things that we all want. Like we want security in our old age. We want our kids to, Roy, thank you for the call. We want our kids to be able to go to college. Or for that matter, us to go to college, for that matter, without ending up massively in debt. There are things that we want to accomplish. We'll be right back. Stick around. We're going to check in with Bob Ney on Talk Media News. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us, the author of Sideswiped, former Congressman Bob Ney. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Happy 2018.
Thank you, Bob. I can think of nobody that I would rather have this conversation with. You are a former Republican member of Congress from Ohio. You know how these guys work. You wrote a book exposing how they work, which is brilliant, and I highly recommend. And what do you think of Michael Wolff's book, and how do you think this thing is going to play out? Do you think that Trump is going to get forced to resign? Do you think he can pull it off? Will he come up with an excuse? I mean, what's going on?
Well, I've talked about this book most of the morning, of course, and because I was in the Congress and was a Republican member. And on this one, there's one point I want to make about the book, but let me get to just a couple of other things first.
Sure.
The White House is saying one thing, and of course another was done because they gave Michael Wolff access to the White House. He was able to have access to people. So this is not like it was some clandestine, quiet, secret book done. Now, they did it because they thought they were going to get a favorable type of article such as Rupert Murdoch, received.
Right, because Michael Wolff wrote a very, a nice biography of Citizen. Was that the Citizen Murdoch book or whatever the title was? Whatever.
I can't remember the title, but it was a good book for Murdoch.
Yeah.
And I think they thought they were going to get that. Now, also, they're kind of jumping around when they say the president talked directly to Michael Wolff or not. There were conversations, they say, but it wasn't related to the book. Well, obviously, it was related to the book. Now, the biggest jackpot on this book, of course, is Bannon. And allies of Bannon are saying, Tom, that Bannon was very close to denying that this book totally came out, in this direction. Now, there was a book, Let Trump Be Trump, which was written by Michael Bossi and Corey Lewandowski, and in that they put a few things, but, nothing obviously on the order of the anti-Trump comments that were made in this book. Now, there's some salacious things in there and some comments about his daughter, and I don't want to skirt over those, all right, and get to the meat of the matter. And that is this, and this is where I think the book causes a lot of trouble. And we'll get to the president in a second of his reaction because it's, legally it's not going to hold water. But anyway, the one main thing that stuck out that they have to be fretting about right now is the fact that Bannon has said point blank that he has total faith, basically, that there is zero doubts that they took the Russians from the initial meeting and took them upstairs to talk to then candidate, or President-elect Donald Trump. And he says that in there.
Yeah, but Veselnitskaya, the Russian lawyer who was in the meeting, said no, that didn't happen.
Right.
She's on the record.
Bannon says it did, and that he has,
No, Bannon said he couldn't imagine it not happening.
Oh, not yes, that he couldn't imagine it not.
He doesn't
happening.
have specific knowledge of it.
Right. Yeah, and so I think at this point in time they're going to have to bring Bannon in. They're going to Mueller is going to have to talk to him and ask, who he knows and what he knows relating to those statements about why he would feel that,
or put him in front of a grand jury.
Right. Well, and the way this runs, and I know, believe me, from personal experience, once Bannon comes in and they say, well, who all did you see that day? Who did you talk to? How do you know? Why do you have, zero doubt that Donald Trump himself saw the Russians? Then he's going to tell. Then they're going to go to those people. So this extends, seriously, another direction, frankly, that we didn't know of yesterday. And I think that's going to cause some heartburn. Now, as far as the lawyers for the president saying, this is defamation of character, good luck on a public official trying to sue anybody for defamation of character. You know how it runs, Tom. You really can't do it. It's got to be really, really bad to do that. So that's a bluff. Now, the interesting part to it that people are talking about in D.C. right now is what kind of gag rule do you impose upon a federal employee, somebody that's, involved with the federal system in the government itself. And there was this supposed, thing, and I don't know if the Trump administration has everybody signed it or not, that supposedly Bannon couldn't talk. I mean, if I were Donald Trump, I would drop this and try to get an agenda going. I think this is just another heartburn, it's another setback, and he's probably going to play into it because, look, Bannon is going to get some exposure from this. Wealthy people have now dropped Bannon, but he's got to do something, so he will continue to get exposure. People that write things like this or are involved with the writings like to get controversy going, and they like to keep it going.
Does he still have the Mercers in his corner?
They dropped him.
They did. So, but in the meantime, Breitbart has become one of the top news sites on the web, and thus probably a cash cow for him.
Well, and that's what he's got left, and again, he will welcome this controversy. So I thought, though, that was the biggest.
So bottom line, Bob, do you think that there's any chance that Donald Trump is resigning this year?
Ellen and I have talked about this. We think maybe for another reason he might eventually get out. Not due to impeachment or this book, but there's a lot of stress to this job.
And he didn't want the job to begin with. According to the book, he promised his wife that there was no way he'd become president. Those are the only terms under which she'd go along with his running.
But knowing his ego, I don't know how valid that's actually going to be. But there's a lot of pressure and stress to this job, and this job now with Donald Trump is not focusing whatsoever on an agenda. It's rarely happened. They got the tax bill through, but it's rarely happened. This is all constant controversy, more than he's ever had.
Is it possible that the donor class is going to cut him loose?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Is it possible that the donor class will not only cut him loose, but turn against him?
They haven't at this point in time. If they got a candidate, I think they particularly would. If they had a candidate. And right now, I just think they're letting things sit as they.
Well, they got Mike Pence. I mean, Mike Pence is actually the guy who put Ryan Zinke in charge of Interior, who put Scott Pruitt in charge of EPA, who put Betsy DeVos in charge of Education. Those were all Mike Pence's appointments. This is basically the Pence White House, and Pence has been a reliable toady for the Koch network, ever since he shifted over from being a reliable toady for tobacco.
Right. I mean, anything's possible.
Yeah.
In this world.
Yeah.
You never know. It's getting hairy.
Okay, Congressman Bob Ney. Great talking with you, Bob.
Too.
Thank you very much. We'll be back. We're going to talk after the break here about the power of corporate monopolies, particularly in what is the new media of our day. Stick around. It's going to get real interesting.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elizabeth Kolbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History. This is from the prologue. Beginnings, it's said, are apt to be shadowy. So it is with this story, which starts with the emergence of a new species, perhaps 200,000 years ago. The species does not yet have a name, nothing does, but it has the capacity to name things. As with any young species, this one's position is precarious. Its numbers are small and its range restricted to a slice of eastern Africa. Still, its population grows, but quite possibly when it contracts again, some would claim near fatally, to just a few thousand pairs. The members of the species are not particularly swift or strong or fertile. They are, however, singularly resourceful. Gradually, they push into regions with different climates, different predators, and different prey. None of the usual constraints of habitat or geography seem to check them. They cross rivers, plateaus, mountain ranges. In coastal regions, they gather shellfish. Farther inland, they hunt mammals. Everywhere they settle, they adapt and innovate. On reaching Europe, they encounter creatures very much like themselves, but stockier and probably brawnier, who have been living on the continent far longer. They interbreed with these creatures and then, by one means or another, kill them off. The end of this affair will turn out to be exemplary. As the species expands its range, it crosses paths with animals twice, 10, even 20 times its size. Huge cats, towering bears, turtle as big as elephants, sloths that stand 15 feet tall. These species are more powerful and even fiercer, but they are slow to breed and thus are wiped out. Although a land animal, our species, ever inventive, crosses the sea. It reaches islands inhabited by evolution's outliers, birds that lay foot-long eggs, pig-sized hippos, giant skinks. Accustomed to isolation, these creatures are ill-equipped to deal with the newcomers or their fellow travelers, mostly rats. Many of them, too, succumb. The process continues in fits and starts for thousands of years until the species, no longer new, has spread to practically every corner of the globe. At this point, several things happen more or less at once that allow Homo sapiens, as it has come to call itself, to reproduce at an unprecedented rate. In a single century, the population doubles. Then it doubles again, and then again. Vast forests are raised. Humans do this deliberately in order to feed themselves. Less deliberately, they shift organisms from one continent to another, reassembling the biosphere. Meanwhile, an even stranger and more radical transformation is underway. Having discovered subterranean reserves of energy, humans begin to change the composition of the atmosphere. This, in turn, alters the climate and the chemistry of the oceans. Some plants and animals adjust by moving. They climb mountains and migrate toward the poles. But a great many, at first hundreds, then thousands, and finally perhaps millions, find themselves marooned. Extinction rates soar, and the texture of life changes. No creature has ever altered life on a planet in this way before, and yet other comparable events have occurred. Very, very occasionally in the distant past, the planet has undergone change so wrenching that the diversity of life has plummeted. 5 of these ancient events were catastrophic enough that they're put in their own category, the so-called Big Five. What seems like a fantastic coincidence, but is probably no coincidence at all, the history of these events is recovered just as people come to realize that they're causing another one. When it's still too early to say whether it will reach the proportions of the Big Five, it becomes known as the Sixth Extinction. The story of the Sixth Extinction, at least as I've chosen to tell it, comes in 13 chapters. Each tracks a species that is in some way emblematic. The American mastodon, the great auk, an ammonite that disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous alongside the dinosaurs. The creatures in the early chapters are already gone.
And this part of the book is mostly concerned with the great extinctions of the past and the twisting history of their discovery, starting with the work of the French nationalist Georges Cuvier. The second part of the book takes place very much in the present, in the increasingly fragmented Amazon rainforest, on a fast-warming slope in the Andes, and on the outer reaches of the Great Barrier Reef. I chose to go to these particular locations for the usual journalistic reasons, because there was a research station or because someone invited me to tag along on an expedition. Such is the scope of the changes now taking place that I could have gone pretty much anywhere, and with the proper guidance found signs of them. One chapter concerns a die-off happening more or less in my own backyard and quite possibly in yours. If extinction is a morbid topic, mass extinction is, well, massively so. It's also a fascinating one. In the pages that follow, I try to convey both sides, the excitement of what's being learned, as well as the horror of it. My hope is that readers of this book will come away with an appreciation of the truly extraordinary moment in which we live. And then jumping to page 15. The same way acoustical engineers speak of background noise, biologists talk about background extinction. In ordinary times, times here understood to mean whole geological epochs, extinction takes place only very rarely, more rarely than even than speciation, and it occurs at what's known as the background extinction rate. This rate varies from one group of organisms to another. Often it's expressed in terms of extinctions per million species years. Calculating the background extinction rate is a laborious task that entails combing through whole databases worth of fossils. And then she goes on to type mammals, it's about 0.25 per million species years. So on. The book, The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert.
Together with
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Matt Stoller is on the line with us. He's, hang on just a second here, Matt. I've got to get over to my, to put you on the air. There we go. Matt Stoller is on the line with us. He is the fellow with the Open Markets Institute, former senior policy advisor and budget analyst to the Senate Budget Committee. OpenMarketInstitute.org is the website. You can tweet him at Matthew Stoller, S-T-O-L-L-E-R, or at Open Markets. Matt, welcome to the program.
Thanks. Big fan. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'm a big fan of you and your work, too. And I watched this video. I found it. It was embedded in an article over at nakedcapitalism.com where you were giving an address to the Harvard Law School, or I'm not sure if it was a graduating class or whatever it was, but and you were talking about monopolies. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And I wanted to get you on to talk about it, particularly monopolies in the digital era. For purposes of this conversation, can we? You used a quote from Brandeis, the Supreme Court Justice, about monopoly. Can we start there?
Sure. So you're talking about the definition of monopoly.
Yes.
Is that the one? Yeah. So Brandeis, there's no actual agreed upon definition of monopoly, but I like the one that Brandeis used, which he gave in testifying to Congress around 1911 or 12. He said a monopoly is the unified control of a recognized branch of trade or service.
Okay, so if we use that as the definition, the unified control, that doesn't require one individual company, does it? I mean, you could argue that the 4 major airlines in the United States have unified control of the majority of air traffic in the United States. Is that a monopoly?
That's right. It's unified control, which can be done in lots of different ways. It can be done through the whether those airlines are formed a cartel, whether there's common ownership of those airlines, or whether just one airline is so much more powerful than the others. I'm not saying this is true in the airline industry, but something like Google, they may not have 100% of the search market, but they have 88% of the search market. Amazon doesn't have 100% of the book market, but they have enough such that they actually control the industry.
They have 74% of it, don't they?
Yeah, something like that. But Walmart, for example, in the mid 2000s, I think they had about 8% of American retail, but they were still the pace setters. They still had substantial amounts of control over the retail industry. So maybe they weren't a monopoly, but they were enormously powerful. So yeah, the definition of monopoly is about, at least the one that we think about, is about control. Control of control of communities.
I would say that the definition is the ability to make a market rather than simply participate in it, the ability to bend a market to your will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean it's control is really what it is, and in all monopolies essentially. I mean, large ones, the ones that we're concerned about, they involve usually control of multiple different sectors of a society. So it isn't just that you control, say, the retail sales, which is the way people might normally look at a Walmart or an Amazon. It's also that you control the labor market in, say, certain towns where you used to maybe you had 10 different stores, the baker, the butcher, the candlestick maker. Now they're all under one roof, Walmart, and Walmart now controls the wage level of that town. So there's lots of different ways that monopolies manifest their control, and it's not always just through one market. It's often through multiple different markets that are
So correct me if I'm wrong in my recollection on this, but I believe that it was the Richard Nixon administration that began the process of breaking up AT&T and the Jimmy Carter administration that finished it, and that was really the last consequential antitrust action we've had in the United States, particularly since around 81 or 82. Reagan functionally stopped enforcing the Sherman Act, and we haven't had a president since then who has done so. Am I engaging in hyperbole here, or is that an accurate timeline?
I would say that broadly it's an accurate narrative. A couple of the details. The AT&T was, I'm not sure if the suit was started under Nixon or Carter. It was finished by Reagan. So Reagan broke up AT&T for a variety of reasons, mostly having to do with the fact that it was government regulated, and it was a very weird situation. But the last major antitrust suit was actually the Microsoft trial in the late 90s. And that had a really big impact on Silicon Valley. It oxygenated the environment for new companies like Google and Facebook. Even though the government won, but then it was overturned, it still had a really enormous impact. But you're absolutely right that the Reagan administration basically ended most antitrust, most merger enforcement. What they did is they rewrote the merger guidelines. And then largely the Clinton administration, with the exception of Microsoft, accepted those changes and enlarged them in the defense space and took it global. So that your narrative is right.
Right, and nobody has slowed that down. If anything, that train has sped up through the Bush, the Obama, and now the Trump administrations. So we just have a couple of minutes left here. There's so much material, Matt, and I refer people check out this YouTube of this speech that Matt gave at Harvard. It's absolutely brilliant. Here we have Google with 88% of the search market, Facebook with 77% of the mobile social networking market. 2/3 of Americans say they get their news from social media, and Facebook controlling 77% of that. Amazon, 74% of the ebooks, half of all online sales growth last year. They have control over their branches of trade and service. It seems to me that by Brandeis's definition, each one of these three companies, not to mention the three of them in aggregate, are a monopoly. What do we do? A, do you agree with that? And B, if so, what do we do about it?
So, yes, they are monopolies, and they're not just monopolies over goods and services. They are monopolies over the lifeblood of democracy, and that is information. So over the advertising and financing of media, culture, entertainment, news, as well as control over books, which are the lifeblood of ideas. So these are not just monopolies. They are critical monopolies, and it's a threat to our democracy that they actually are these gatekeepers. What to do about them? Well, you have to recognize, first of all, that these are political institutions, and that as political institutions, they need to be fit into our constitutional order. In terms of specifics, the first thing you do is you stop allowing them to get bigger by buying other companies. No more mergers. Amazon shouldn't have been allowed to buy Whole Foods. Facebook shouldn't have been allowed to buy a whole bunch of companies it bought. Google shouldn't have been allowed to buy DoubleClick. No more mergers. That's the very first step. And once you do that, you can start to investigate, but you'll start to see more competition come into it. And there's a whole bunch of other things you can do, and we need to do them all. We need a full spectrum approach. But the key is to recognize conceptually that these are political institutions, and they need to be addressed on a political level.
That Google, Facebook, and Amazon have become major political players in our country. How different is the European Union dealing with this issue of monopoly in the tech sector from the way that the United States does?
So there's a sort of interesting set of allies on both sides of the Atlantic and kind of opponents on both sides of the Atlantic. So there's a lot of people who still believe in this kind of old Reaganite frame of that's kind of pro-concentration. But you're seeing a lot of people who are now, I mean, I'm one of them, I think, but there are a bunch of people in Europe who are starting to say, hey, these institutions are a threat to our society. And the nice thing is that in Europe, what you're seeing is the Margaret Vestager, who's basically the head antitrust person for the EU, is really taking Google on. And then you also have a bunch of privacy regulators in Europe who are really taking on Facebook and Google and trying to undermine their ability to control the revenue that publishers and newspapers are getting. So it's very exciting to watch what they're doing. And we're a little bit behind in this country, although you do see some movement, like a challenge to the AT&T Time Warner merger, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. It's a weird moment, but it's actually a very positive moment in terms of an intellectual revolution to address these problems.
Yeah, it may well be. Matt, can you stick around for a little bit?
Sure.
I would love to dig a little deeper into this. We're going to hit a couple of breaks here over the next few minutes, but in fact, we're hitting one right now. We'll be right back. Matt Stoller is with us. He is a fellow with the Open Market Institute, senior policy advisor, budget analyst, the Senate Budget Committee, and formerly, and openmarketinstitute.org. You can tweet him at Matthew Stoller, S-T-O-L-L-E-R, and at Open Markets. And we'll be sure to put up on our Facebook page, and I'll get it off on our Twitter link as well, a link to your YouTube piece. We'll be back with Matt right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Matt, you still with me?
I am.
Okay, great. We just lost our commercial stations, but we're still with about half our audience, our non-commercial stations. And when and after this 4-minute segment where our commercial stations are on break, when we come back with them, if anything of consequence is said, I'll try to summarize it. I understand that your group or you were the subject of an attack from Google because of your political activity or because you were calling for these break. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So in August, I think it was July or August of last year, the European Union came out with a fine against Google and a set of rules on them for monopolization. And we sent out a press release that said, good job, this is long overdue. That was the gist of it. And my group, Open Markets, had been part of a think tank called New America. New America gets a lot of funding from Google. Most nonprofits in D.C. get funding from Google, so we were the only ones to actually say, good job for doing this. And immediately afterwards, we were essentially the guy who I worked for is a guy named Barry Lynn. He was fired and told that the Open Markets Group had to spin out of New America. And so we worked hard to try to convince them that was a bad idea, but they insisted. This is the leader of New America. Her name is Anne-Marie Slaughter. And so I guess it was in August, September, we spun off and we became independent. And it was really just a testament to the kind of power of Google, their ability to leverage their funding to actually control the intellectual debate in D.C. And that's what happened. And it was, we're fine. We have foundation funding, but a lot of people in the political and policy dialogue are not actually free to say what they want to say because of the control of these institutions.
Well, and I could, give you an example. I mean, this program, we're on Google. I mean, we're on YouTube, which is owned by Google. And it's it generates a couple $1,000 a month for the show. It's not going to make or break us, but it does help us do a lot of things. And at a certain level, I'm thinking, as both the owner of the company and the host of the show, do I really want to hurt my relationship with YouTube by taking on Google? And that should not be part of my thinking when I'm talking about the news. I mean, this is not a good thing.
You're right, and there are a lot of YouTube stars who are having this problem all the time. You mean Google? You're not the first person I've heard that from. It's happening across the board. People are really afraid of Google and Facebook. They pick winners and losers, and if they liked you and thought you were an important voice, that 1 or 2,000 or however much could be 10 or 20 or 30,000. I mean, the amount of power they have to change the flow of revenue does actually manifest itself in the control of the political debate, and that's dangerous. That's really dangerous. Not to say that you should, kiss up to Google and get that extra money, but the point here is that the power they have is really overwhelming, and they use it.
Yeah, and we're not talking here about shoes, or ice cream cones. We're talking about information. We're talking about the media. This is pretty amazing.
We're talking about the truth of Thom Hartmann.
There you go. Matt, we're going to rejoin our commercial stations here, and we'll take this to 28 minutes past the hour, if that's okay with you. We'll recap this real quickly. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Okay.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
To the Senate Budget Committee, openmarketinstitute.org. Matt, I have all that right?
That's right.
Okay, great. You and I were just talking about how Google basically pulled funding from your organization because you had congratulated the federal government on some sort of antitrust.
European.
I'm sorry?
The EU, not.
Oh, the EU,
American
right? Because the EU was taking them on, and the implications of this. And I mentioned, okay, we make money on this show from YouTube, and from putting ads on our YouTubes out there, and that's got to be causing people in the media who are using Google either as a search, an optimized search engine, or as in other words, to find their websites or shows. But this is that's kind of a negative pressure on people who might be influencers. But there's a larger issue here too, and that is that we have dealt with this in the past. I mean, back in the 19 teens, when the big movie houses were starting up, they owned their own theaters, and Congress stepped in and said you can't own your own theaters. You can't have vertical integration. The early radio stations, there were the early radio networks. Were not allowed to own radio stations. You had the prime time rule in television in the 1970s, as I recall. In fact, I think the first big company to take advantage of that was the Mary Tyler Moore Company, that said that primetime programming can't be, there's a certain percentage of it has to come from independent providers. So we have a long history of breaking up vertical and horizontal integration. A, can you speak to that and correct any misinformation I might have just laid on you? And B, how do we apply that kind of thinking? How do we even, number one, revive that kind of thinking in our culture, in our political culture, and B, apply that to these giant internet behemoths?
Well, I mean, you're right. It goes back even further. I mean, we didn't allow AT&T to own Western Union, and there are a whole bunch of debates over the emergence of the telegraph and how they colluded with at the time, Associated Press, even to try to throw a presidential election in the late 1800s. Radio being segmented off, television being segmented off, the vertical integration in the movie business, the FinCEN rules that you talked about in terms of television. And then the most recent one is net neutrality. I mean, net neutrality is a rule that basically says you are not allowed to pick winners and losers on a public platform that you are entrusted to manage. And that's what we said to telecom companies.
Right, but we're going the wrong way. We just blew up net neutrality.
Well, we did. Yeah, that's right. And basically what we need to say is it goes back to the railroads, and you can trace this back to the British East Indies Company, and even before then. What we basically have to say is, look, if you own a platform, if you manage a platform that is critical for some sort of public purpose, you cannot compete on that platform. So a kind of Glass-Steagall-like separation of platform and commerce. No, Amazon can't be both a main platform for book sales and the largest publisher in the country, which it is. And on and on and on and on and on, and so on and so forth. And that's actually what the merger challenge of AT&T Time Warner is about. It's about no vertical integration of Time Warner content through AT&T distribution channels. So if the DOJ is going to challenge that one, then the logic is that they have to actually start to look at vertical integration in much more powerful institutions like Google, Facebook, and Amazon.
Yeah, but the problem is that I think there's a broad consensus in D.C. that the only reason the DOJ is going after Time Warner, the Time Warner AT&T merger, is because Donald Trump is pissed off at CNN. Forgive my French. I'm not there, and the reason is because I know a bunch of people at DOJ, and these are lawyers who I don't always agree with them, but they can easily go to big law jobs if they felt there was political interference. They would be complaining. So you think this is an honest effort?
Oh yeah, they just think that the Comcast NBC deal, which they allowed through with conditions, that those conditions were a failure, and they don't want to let that happen again. There's a completely legitimate case here. Now, it's also the case that Donald Trump is a would-be autocrat, and so you need to both make sure that the case goes through and that Donald Trump isn't interfering in it. Right. But just because Donald Trump has autocratic tendencies doesn't mean that AT&T should be allowed to do whatever they want.
Okay, Matt, we have just 1 minute left before we hit a hard break at the bottom of the hour and wrap this thing up. What can people do if they consider this a problem, if they're concerned about these massive monopolies, and not just these three tech companies, although they're fairly in our face, but what can we do?
Well, first of all, go to Open Markets, our website. There's a bunch of explainers there, a lot of information. And then start asking your member of Congress to join the Antitrust Caucus. It's a new Congress caucus that just got started in the House to learn about antitrust. And it's Keith Ellison is one of the leaders of it. Yeah. But it's going to be an important forum. So
yeah, we had Mark Pocan on yesterday talking about it.
Yeah, Mark Pocan is So just get educated. That's the first part. Get educated on this, and we're going to fight and we're going to win.
Great. There you go. Matt, the music should be up, Arthur. Hey, Matt, thanks so much for being with us today. Matt Stoller with openmarketinstitute.org. And you can tweet him at Matthew Stoller, S-T-O-L-L-E-R. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Matt?
That's Stoller, but thank you.
Stoller. Okay, thank you. My apologies. Matt, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thanks a lot.
We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after this.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword, at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You have reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified. We have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea and the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle-down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a ghost story by Arundhati Roy.
Any place you want. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, what a day. Tyrone in New York City. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Yeah, I was listening to Fox News, and they had Ann Coulter on, and she pretty much verified the part of the book that Wolf said that she had to approach Trump and tell him, listen, you can't hire your family to, you can't have a dictatorship because that's what dictators do. And I'm thinking, I'm like, well, wait a minute. What happened to all those people that was around him that's supposed to be advisors to him? They had banned. She said they were Bannon, they were Kushner, because he had just won the election. I said, she said she spoke to them and said to them, y'all got to tell him that he can't do this. And they wouldn't tell him. They was like, no, we're not going to tell him. So I'm saying, you got all these people around you, and none of them can advise you to what you should or shouldn't do. And the person that's not even in your cabinet, not the real advisor to you, which is Ann Coulter, is the one that's going to tell you this. Maybe that's why she's not in his cabinet, because she told him the truth. But I said to the host of the show, I said, don't that give you some concern that this guy can't be told the truth by his cabinet, the people that are supposed to be protecting the American people?
Yeah, he's behaving like, the old crazy king, where nobody could speak to the king and everybody was scared that he'd say off with their heads, et cetera. I think, Tyrone, you've identified one of the biggest weaknesses of the Trump White House and of the Trump administration, for that matter, which is that they don't seem to have any control. Donald Trump does not have the ability to accept criticism and constructive criticism. And as a result, in fact, he destroys people who offer to help him, to offer constructive criticism. That's a really, really brilliant observation. And like I said, I think this is one of the greatest weaknesses of the Trump presidency. Tyrone, thank you for the call. Thanks for listening to SiriusXM. David in Belen, New Mexico, listening to 1350 AM. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, hello, Tom. I was just wondering, maybe Indivisible, we're dealing with the lapdogs in Congress of the donors. Why not take this to the donors? Why not take it, Indivisible, take it to demonstrations right in front of the Koch brothers' home and stuff like that?
Because they can have you arrested.
Hello?
Yeah, I said because they can have you arrested. David, this is the reason why, and this, I think most Americans don't understand this. They're willing to trade government, running our country, answerable to we the people, for corporations running our country because, gee, capitalism's so much more efficient. But the simple reality is that, if an elected official is doing stuff you don't like, you have every right to be out in front of their offices. You can, speak ill of them. You can trash talk them on Facebook and Twitter. You can do anything you want. If a corporation makes you unhappy and you try to take them on, that corporation has the power to sue you. That corporation has the power to prevent you from protesting them. Is slap suits? Google slap suits. SLAPP. You'll see. I mean, there's just so many ways that they can shoot you down. That going after the donor class, I understand the sentiment, and I think that part of all the bad publicity around the Trump administration has embarrassed Robert Mercer to the point that he's somewhat certainly pulled out of his support for Steve Bannon. But it's damn tough to take on these giant corporations or the billionaires that the corporations made rich. And so, I get it, but it's going to be a challenge. David, thank you. Randall in Pahrump, Nevada. Hey, Randall, what's up?
Hello, Tom.
Hey, what's up?
I am calling actually, this is a call from, I've been on hold here for about 40 minutes, so I'm kind of backtracking here.
Okay.
Earlier you had a call on talking about a possible end to the Trump presidency and how that may occur, and he spoke about Pence not want or would probably pardon Donald Trump if it came down to his being impeached and possible prosecution. I don't think Pence will pardon Donald Trump, and the reason for that is I think he doesn't want to end up being another Gerald Ford.
Why would he not? I mean, if that gets him what he wants. I mean, keep in mind, Mike Pence is a creature of the billionaire networks. And I mean, he used to be the shill for big tobacco. Now he's the shill for big oil and fossil fuels. And if he's no longer vice president, he's got, a $5, $10, $20 million a year job waiting for him at the Coal Council, or one of the fossil fuel think tanks or lobbying groups. Why would he be, freaked out about being a one-term president?
Well, I think it goes to legacy. I think Mike Pence is pretty much the consummate politician. He likes being in government. I think he wants to get reelected. Mm-hmm. And he'd like to have at least a second term to get his agenda through, his religious agenda,
Well, yeah, there is that. I mean, he's apparently a true believer. One of the people who actually thinks that God has a plan for him, and he's doing God's will when he does the billionaire's will. And what was the joke Donald Trump made, that he wants to hang all the gay people? I mean, it's like, so yeah, his ambitions may propel him. Yeah, that's a good point, Randall. It's a very good point. I was thinking of it very pragmatically, and probably that's a mistake. Randall, thanks for the call. Well said. Bill in Chicago. Hey, Bill, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up? Bill?
Hello?
Hey, you're on the air, Bill.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you said that again. Let me take you off the speaker.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to refer to that, talked about Donald Trump taking an annual physical.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, maybe Huckabee Sanders mentioned that more than once, but when I heard her say that, she said it would be in February or March. So I was very skeptical about the whole thing, so I looked it up in a few places, and what I found out is the annual physical for the president is not mandated by law.
Correct.
Nor is the divulging of the results to the public mandated by law.
That's right. It's become a tradition since Eisenhower had a heart attack in 1959.
Well, but however, so was the income tax thing. So based on Trump's past behavior, I will not believe until I see it that he will ever probably have a good physical, and certainly not divulge it to the public.
Yeah, very interesting.
Unless, like you say, if it can be used as some smokescreen to leave office. Mm-hmm. But I personally don't see that happening.
Yeah, because, illness in his mind is weakness. And, he's the whole germaphobe thing. He's terribly afraid of being perceived as being weak, to the point that he's willing to throw compassion to the wind because he views that as weakness. I mean, this guy has a very, very, very weird value system. And
but to me, it does blow my mind that is not mandated by law.
Yeah.
And you forget about the mental part of it. Just the physical part is not mandated. I mean,
yeah.
It's, to me, I can't believe.
Well, on the one hand, on the other hand, if somebody had examined Franklin Roosevelt 6 months before he died of a stroke in office and said, this guy's probably going to have a stroke, would we have wanted to remove him from office?
Well, again, then, but would the science be good enough to predict it then?
Yeah, see, I think that's why it's not mandated by law, is because all this stuff is so subjective and it could be abused.
However, the raw numbers can be divulged, but won't be divulged for Trump, is what I believe.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent point. Bill, thank you for the call. Vera in Lake Forest, California. Hey, Vera, what's up?
Hi, this is a grandmother disgruntled to death. I ended up in the hospital already twice listening to our 45th president vociferate some idiocies that go from here to heaven into the retraction of civilization itself. I am very, very, very upset, frustrated. And I was just listening to your interview of a particular man who's on the organization there. I can't remember the organization he was in, talking about how to stop monopolies, etc.
Mm-hmm.
This country has had a very soft, socially speaking, coup d'etat by the military industrial power. No doubt about it. I lived in a dictatorship. I wasn't as afraid as I am right now here.
Whoa.
This is pathetic. We have lost the rule of law. We have lost any sense of logic. Democracy, it's a joke. The voting system is depleted. And what is left of us? We do not have a left or a right or an intermediate or a democracy, Democrat or Republican anymore structure to handle.
Well, I don't think it's quite that bleak, but I do share your concerns, Vera, and particularly our whole voting system, has been, our votes was privatized in 2002 with the Help America Vote Act, and that has, apparently worked to the benefit of the Republican Party, as in state after state. Ever since then, somehow more Republicans get elected according to the voting machines than according to the exit polls, which we use and the UN uses all around the world as proof of election fraud. Vera, thank you for the call. Not voter fraud, but election fraud. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Alex, watching us on YouTube in Edison, New Jersey. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Alex.
Let me start with the punchline here. I don't want to abolish Grover Norquist. I simply want to reduce him to a size where I can drag him into the bathroom and drown his influence in the bathtub.
Okay. I don't think you want to drown Grover Norquist in the bathtub, but maybe his policies?
I said his influence.
Oh, his influence. Okay.
Said,
sorry, I missed the word.
The topic is government-generated tax returns.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if I heard this on your show or not. I forget. But there's a reason why we don't have it. I already gave it away. But it's not the accounting lot. It's Grover Norquist. He called it a tax increase. And he said that it would make it easy for the government to raise taxes and it go unnoticed. And everyone who signed that stupid pledge won't go for it.
Right.
The anti-tax people want it to be painful.
I know that.
Tax.
I know that.
It is the only...
They were very, very upset when Franklin Roosevelt introduced, I believe it was FDR, introduced automatic payroll deductions.
Oh, okay.
Because they wanted people at the end of the year to have to painfully write a check to the government.
There was a pilot program in California, and I forget the number. It's something like 90% of the people who tried it, they said they really liked it. It just made their life easy.
Mm-hmm.
And, it is stressful. It's inconvenient. It's just, this is the only tangible experience you have with, the federal government, for most people anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough. And it's not just because this is just how it is. Someone has designed it that way.
Right, and it doesn't have to be this way. It's not this way in most other countries. In most other countries, your taxes are done in 15, 20 minutes or an hour at the most, and it's just a very simple and straightforward process. We make it complex in the United States because that benefits rich people.
All right. Have a happy New Year, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. You too. Good talking with you. Spot on. Buck in San Clemente, California. Hey, Buck, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
the 25th Amendment. I had a job one time where my boss was just unbearable. I was in advertising and marketing. I was a creative director, and he insisted that I go to this EST-type weekend seminar.
Oh, I remember those days.
Yeah. And so I went, and at the end, they videotaped me, and they said, well, before anybody goes, we want you all to be, on video camera and make a little statement. So I got stood in front of the camera and said, okay, it was great weekend, blah-de-da, let me out of here,
Right.
And it reminded me of Trump University, okay? And he had, I thought of Trump, this is his ace in the hole. The Trump University, he had everybody give little video pitches at the end.
Right.
And he was thinking, before he became president, that, I've got these people that are right. They've said how great it is, right? The same thing with his cabinet. They've all licked his boots. He's got it on him.
Yeah.
There's no way he's going to, not bring that
until the tide turns.
They love me.
Until the tide turns. This will turn really rapidly. If it happens, you're going to see the whole cabinet sweep, in my opinion. Buck, thanks for the call. You got to run. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Some years ago, Andy Borowitz said that we could share his stories on the air. I'm assuming that that's still the case. The Borowitz report today, it's in the New Yorker magazine right now, right? Yeah, NewYorker.com. Furious over a very public breakup with his former advisor, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump on Wednesday angrily threw a copy of Mein Kampf that Bannon had inscribed to him in the trash. The book, which Bannon had given to Trump as a token of his love and friendship during this 2016 campaign, had been among Trump's most prized possessions, aides said. One aide said, Trump loved that book, but now he feels that having Bannon's name on it ruins it. Another aide, however, cautioned not to make too much of the fact that Trump discarded the Bannon-signed Hitler book. He's got plenty of other copies, the aide said. And it goes on from there. Check it out at New Yorker. And, of course, the 11 explosive claims. I'm going to get into those in just a second. But first, Betty in Sacramento. Hey, Betty, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Tom. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year, Betty.
No, thanks so much. Hey, couple of quick comments and then a question. First of all, we're going to have to make a bunch of new laws after Trump gets out of office to take care of the stupid stuff he's doing. Second of all, regarding net neutrality, I went online yesterday to shop for some stuff. I got through page 6 before I just kind of gave up because all but 1 or 2 listings on each page on Google was a paid ad.
Oh, yeah.
Every single one. It was insane.
Oh, they're making a lot of money.
Oh, God, it was frustrating. You just can't find any information. Anyway, so my question is, with Rudy Giuliani's appointment, or his law firm appointment, I think it's Southern District of New York, it seems fairly obvious that Trump is insulating himself from state prosecution because he can't get pardoned out of that.
That's correct.
And if the Dems take over in November, which I personally don't really think is a slam dunk, it's going to take a lot of work.
Yep. In fact, it's unlikely. It's unlikely, Betty. I mean, everything is suggesting that while, yes, we may have a blue wave, that the Democrats taking either the House or the Senate is, the odds of that are way below 50%. But back to you, Betty.
Well, that's depressing.
Well, it just means we have to work our butts off.
Well, that's my plan. So,
yep, mine too.
But can those attorney appointments, can they be reversed? Does that require some kind of hard evidence of cover-up or can...
Yeah, if you're talking federal judges or federal prosecutors, the federal prosecutors, typically when the presidency changes, the new president asks all of the federal prosecutors from the old president to submit their resignations, and then some of them get reappointed and other people get put into those places. Weirdly, Bill Clinton didn't do that, and so he ended up with a bunch of George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan federal prosecutors in various offices, which didn't help him when his own troubles were being, confronted. But Trump certainly did that, and those are not lifetime appointments. But the federal judges that Trump is putting into place, those are lifetime appointments, and they can only be unseated. These people, in some cases, they've never even tried a case. In many cases, their only credential is that they run a right-wing blog or they're right-wing, crazies, and usually with a law degree. Those people are going to be on the federal bench until the day they die, no matter what, no matter who's president, no matter what happens. They can only be removed by impeachment.
Well, that's bad enough news.
Yeah.
But between say, as I said, unrealistic as it may be, if Dems take over in 2018, does that mean we're stuck with Rudy Giuliani's law firm until presumably or hopefully a Democrat gets elected president in 2020? So there's nothing we can do for that.
He put a person from Giuliani's law firm in as a federal prosecutor, didn't he?
Yes.
I just saw the headline this morning. I didn't read the story.
Northern District of New York, one of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, and both of them basically. Remember when he interviewed the applicants?
Yep.
That's what he was looking for.
Yep.
Will you kiss the ring?
Yep.
And yes, I'll put you in office if you'll kiss the ring and not prosecute me.
Yep. Yep. I think you're absolutely right, and that those people cannot be removed from office except by impeachment or by Donald Trump himself, by the president himself.
Or the next president. Okay.
Or the next president, yeah. Yeah, that's the answer.
Thanks.
Okay. Good talking to you, Betty. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. Armin in Bradenton, Florida. Hey, Armin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, dear friend.
Hey, Armin.
Hey, listen. I went back the last 40 years and did a preliminary study of private health insurance premium increases that far surpassed inflation.
Mm-hmm.
You do that, and you have study groups that listen to your show. You'll see that there's beyond a trend. It's blatant bribery and mafia, in my opinion, corruption at the corporate level. It's just blatant. And a lot of people arguably were displeased with Obamacare because of the premium increases, but what they fail to significantly out about Obamacare was Obamacare pretty much got rid of useless garbage health insurance that didn't pay anything and dramatically increased the standard in the coverage.
Right.
So it's not a fair argument to just attack it because of the premium increases, because I was one of those people that thought I had insurance and it was converted without me knowing it. And I got in the hospital looking at $150,000 in bills, and the insurance company says, "Oh, we changed it. We're only going to pay you $5,000." That's what Aetna said.
Whoa.
So, yeah. They said, "We're only going to." I said, "When did you convert it?" They said, "We sent you a letter." I didn't get a letter. It wasn't certified. I had no clue. And I was looking at $150,000 in heart bypass operation, had a heart attack. And one person at Aetna says, "Oh, you're covered." Then the other person at Aetna says, "No, it's been converted." So they were charging me $5,000 a year for $5,000 coverage. That's the gangsters that run the health insurance company.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm sorry to hear that story, Armin, and I hope I hope you come through it okay. And I'm glad you're still with us. Armin, thanks a lot for the call. Thank you all for being with us today. Quite a day here as the Trump presidency continues to unravel, or the United States continues to unravel. And certainly Ryan Zinke and Brian Pruitt and Betsy DeVos and all these people who are committed to taking apart the America, do their work. But democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeats.com.